I still can't quite believe how quickly things went from normal to absolutely terrifying. 2 months ago, I was just a minicab driver in Newcastle, trying to make ends meet after losing my warehouse job. Now I'm hiding in a service station near Durham, and tomorrow night I'm supposed to help transport someone to their death in a Red Room broadcast that I've been unknowingly facilitating for weeks. I've been driving for Galaxy Cars for about 6 months. It's not glamorous work, late nights, drunk passengers, navigating through traffic for what works out to less than minimum wage most shifts. But after the warehouse closed down, it was the only job I could get that didn't require waiting weeks for security clearances or training courses. You just need a clean license, a reasonably decent car, and the ability to deal with difficult people. The job that changed everything started in early October. I got a call from the dispatcher about a regular booking. Someone who needed transport twice a week, always the same route, always paid in cash. The customer was described as a professional gentleman who required discretion and reliability. The pay was better than usual, and regular bookings are gold dust in the minicab business. The passenger was a man in his 40s called Michael Stevens. He was always waiting outside when I arrived, always polite and professional, and never wanted to make small talk during the journey. The route was consistent: pick up from a residential address in Gosforth, drive to an industrial estate on the outskirts of the city, wait for about 2 hours, then drive him back home. Michael explained that he worked in media production and needed transport to a specialized facility where his company created content for online platforms. He said the work required unusual hours and that he preferred having a reliable driver rather than using different taxi services that might not understand his schedule. The industrial estate where I dropped Michael was one of those anonymous business parks filled with warehouses and small manufacturing units. The specific building he used was unmarked, with blackened windows and several high-end cars usually parked outside. During the 2-hour wait, I'd see other people arriving and leaving, all carrying equipment cases or technical gear. After several weeks of this routine, Michael started asking if I'd be interested in additional work. He needed someone to help with equipment transport, moving cameras, lighting gear, and computer systems between different locations. The pay was substantially better than driving, and Michael assured me the work was straightforward manual labor. I agreed to the additional work, partly for the money, and partly because I was curious about what kind of media production required such elaborate security and secrecy. Michael explained that his company created specialized content for niche audiences who paid premium rates for high-quality, authentic material. The equipment transport work involved loading and unloading professional-grade cameras, sophisticated lighting systems, and computer servers that seemed more advanced than anything I'd seen in normal television or film production. Everything was carefully packaged and required precise handling to avoid damage. Michael gradually introduced me to more aspects of his operation. He needed help setting up equipment in different locations, not just the industrial estate, but also residential properties and commercial spaces around Newcastle and the surrounding areas. The setups were always temporary, designed to be assembled quickly and dismantled without leaving traces. The locations varied, but they all shared certain characteristics: soundproofed rooms with controlled access, spaces that could be completely isolated from outside observation, and technical infrastructure that supported high-bandwidth internet connections. Michael explained that this variety was necessary for creating diverse content that would appeal to different audience preferences. As weeks passed, Michael began explaining more about his business model. His company produced what he called authentic interactive content for online platforms that specialized in realistic, unscripted material. Viewers paid substantial amounts for access to live streams that felt genuine rather than obviously staged or performed. The technical requirements for this content were demanding. Multiple camera angles, professional lighting that could be adjusted in real time, audio systems that captured every detail, and streaming infrastructure that could handle thousands of simultaneous viewers without interruption. Michael's operation was sophisticated enough to meet these standards consistently. Michael also started discussing the importance of finding suitable performers for his content. He explained that the most valuable material featured people who provided authentic reactions to various situations. Viewers could distinguish between obvious acting and genuine responses. So his company specialized in creating scenarios that produced real emotions and reactions. About a month into the equipment work, Michael asked if I'd be interested in a different type of assignment. He needed someone to help with what he called scenario testing, essentially helping to verify that technical setups would work correctly for live broadcasts. The pay for this work was even better, and Michael assured me it was just technical verification rather than actual content creation. The scenario testing involved me spending time in the prepared spaces, while Michael operated the equipment from control rooms. He would test camera angles, audio levels, lighting configurations, and streaming quality by having me move through different positions and respond to various prompts he provided through the technical systems. Michael explained that this testing was essential because his audience expected flawless technical quality. Any problems with audio, video, or streaming could ruin the viewing experience and damage his company's reputation. The testing sessions helped ensure that everything would work perfectly during actual broadcasts. The testing became increasingly elaborate. Michael would simulate various scenarios, test my responses to different types of stimuli, and document my reactions to unexpected situations. He said this comprehensive testing helped his company understand how their technical setups would perform under the stress of live broadcasting. During these sessions, Michael would give detailed instructions about timing, positioning, and responses to different cues, follow specific movement patterns, react to various sensory inputs, demonstrate how someone might behave in challenging circumstances. He claimed this testing helped optimize the technical systems for capturing authentic human responses. 3 weeks ago, everything became clear in the most horrifying way possible. I was conducting what Michael had described as a final comprehensive test when I noticed that the monitors in the control room were displaying more than just local recording interfaces. Multiple screens showed dark web streaming platforms with view accounts, indicating thousands of people watching live feeds. Michael's media production company wasn't creating content for mainstream online platforms. It was broadcasting live torture and murder to paying audiences on the dark web. The spaces I'd been helping to set up were red rooms, and I had been unknowingly preparing them for operation while gradually being recruited as their transport coordinator. The weeks of scenario testing had been training sessions, teaching me the locations and procedures I'd need to know as their logistics coordinator. My equipment transport and setup work had been gradually transformed into preparation for facilitating actual Red Room operations, moving victims and managing the technical infrastructure. Michael dropped all pretense when he realized I understood what was happening. He calmly explained that minicab drivers were ideal logistics coordinators for his operation. They could transport victims without raising suspicion, had legitimate reasons for visiting multiple locations, and could move equipment between sites as part of their normal work routine. The industrial estate facility was just one node in a larger operation that used multiple locations across the Northeast. Michael's company specialized in identifying and recruiting people whose jobs provided cover for the gradual conditioning process required to create authentic dark web content. My scenario testing sessions had been training me for tomorrow night's operation. I'd been learning the procedures for transporting unwilling victims, understanding the technical requirements for live broadcasts, and becoming familiar with the security protocols necessary for avoiding detection during actual Red Room events. I managed to escape while Michael was distracted with technical preparations, but I know his surveillance network extends far beyond the locations I'd visited. They've been monitoring my communications, tracking my movements through the minicab company's GPS systems, and building detailed profiles of my personal life. Since leaving Newcastle, I've been moving between different locations, but they keep finding me. Messages sent to my phone despite changing numbers, people who seem to recognize me at petrol stations and service areas, evidence that my movements are being tracked through methods I don't understand. Yesterday, I received a package at the bed and breakfast where I'd been staying. A package containing a sat-nav device that showed tomorrow night's pickup location and delivery route. Michael's operation had been preparing for months, and they expected me to transport their next victim to the prepared Red Room facility. The package included detailed information about tomorrow's victim, a young woman who had been selected and prepared through their recruitment network. They knew her routines, her vulnerabilities, and exactly how to get her into my car without raising suspicion. My role was to collect her and deliver her to the broadcast location. I could go to the police, but Michael has spent months creating evidence that would suggest I was a willing participant in his dark web activities. Galaxy Cars would have records of my regular bookings, my involvement in equipment transport, and my participation in what they would call training sessions that could be presented as voluntary preparation for criminal activity. Security cameras at the various locations would show me helping to set up equipment, following Michael's instructions, and participating in what could be characterized as preparation for facilitating kidnapping and murder. Without context, my actions would appear to show someone knowingly working as a logistics coordinator for dark web Red Room operations. Michael's operation is too sophisticated, too well established, too experienced at managing unwilling participants. The minicab industry provides perfect cover. Drivers regularly visit unfamiliar locations, work irregular hours, and have legitimate reasons for transporting equipment and spending time in industrial areas. Tomorrow night, thousands of people will watch what Michael's audience has been anticipating for weeks. They've paid to see a carefully planned abduction and murder, and they expect their logistics coordinator to deliver the victim as promised. My months of unknowing preparation have led to this moment. I'm writing this from a service station toilet because it's one of the few places with constant lighting and regular security patrols. But I know they're still watching somehow. The sat-nav device included details about tomorrow's victim and pickup location, suggesting their operation extends to surveillance and recruitment networks I never suspected. In roughly 20 hours, I'll have to decide whether to collect the victim they've assigned me or refuse to participate and face the consequences. But Michael has demonstrated that his network can track me across multiple counties, and they have evidence that could destroy my life even if I don't complete tomorrow's assignment. The most terrifying realization is that Michael's operation probably uses multiple drivers simultaneously. How many other minicab drivers might be unknowingly transporting victims to Red Room facilities? How many regular bookings might be training operations for logistics coordinators who don't understand what they're really facilitating? The transport industry provides perfect access to isolated workers who visit unfamiliar locations, handle sensitive cargo, and are expected to maintain discretion about their passengers and destinations. It's an ideal setup for exploitation, by people who understand how to gradually transform routine work into participation in something much darker. Michael's technical expertise allows him to maintain sophisticated surveillance and streaming operations while using legitimate transport needs as cover. His business credentials provide credibility, his security requirements deflect suspicion, and his resources allow him to maintain operations across multiple locations. Tomorrow's broadcast is being promoted as featuring a carefully orchestrated abduction using their trained logistics network. Michael's audience values the meticulous planning and professional execution that their driver coordination system enables. I never thought driving a minicab could lead to this kind of moral crisis. I thought the biggest risks were difficult passengers or road accidents. I never imagined that regular bookings could lead to becoming complicit in someone else's murder. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so terrifying. I spent months learning to become an accomplice to murder without knowing what I was training for. Tomorrow's broadcast is titled Perfect Delivery. Michael's audience is expecting a flawless abduction executed by their professionally trained logistics coordinator. And an innocent woman is going to die because I helped build the system that will kill her. The driver becomes the deliverer of death to someone who has no idea what's coming. And I still don't know if I'll show up or let them destroy my life for refusing to complete the delivery. Have you ever wondered what it's like to watch someone being murdered and not realize it until months later? 3 months ago, I was just a night security guard at a business park in Reading, spending my shifts reading books and doing crosswords. Now, I'm in protective custody somewhere in Wales, and my testimony about what I saw through CCTV cameras could expose a Red Room operation that's been broadcasting murders to thousands of viewers, while I unknowingly watched it all happen in real time. I've worked security for Morrison Security Services for about 2 years. It's easy work most of the time. Monitor CCTV feeds, do periodic building checks, log any incidents in the security report. The business park I cover has about 20 units, mostly small manufacturing companies and storage facilities that operate during normal business hours. My job is to make sure nothing gets broken into overnight. The unit that changed everything was Industrial Solutions Loyalty, a company that rented one of the larger warehouse spaces about 4 months ago. According to their lease application, they were in import-export, dealing with specialized equipment for various industries. They kept normal business hours initially, with delivery trucks arriving during the day and staff leaving by early evening. Industrial Solutions was run by a man called David Chen, who seemed professional and legitimate. When he signed the lease, he explained that his company required enhanced security and privacy due to the sensitive nature of their work with international clients. This meant upgrading the CCTV coverage in their section of the business park and installing additional monitoring equipment. The upgraded surveillance system was impressive. High-definition cameras with night vision capabilities, audio recording equipment, and monitoring software that could track movement patterns and identify unusual activity. David explained that his clients required this level of security documentation for insurance and compliance purposes. As the security guard responsible for monitoring these feeds, I was trained to use the new equipment and given specific instructions about documenting any activity around Industrial Solutions. This included logging delivery times, recording visitor details, and maintaining detailed reports about anyone who accessed their facility outside normal business hours. Initially, everything seemed routine. Delivery trucks during the day, occasional evening meetings with what appeared to be international clients, and standard warehouse activities. The enhanced CCTV coverage meant I could monitor their operations more thoroughly than other units, but nothing seemed suspicious or concerning. About 6 weeks after Industrial Solutions moved in, their activity patterns began to change. Instead of finishing by early evening, staff would often remain until very late at night. The types of deliveries also shifted: fewer commercial trucks and more unmarked vans arriving at unusual hours, often staying for extended periods. David explained these changes when I mentioned them in my security reports. He said the company was expanding into time-sensitive international markets that required round-the-clock operations. The unusual delivery schedule was necessary to coordinate with clients in different time zones who needed immediate access to specialized equipment. The nighttime activities gradually became more frequent and elaborate. I'd watch through the CCTV feeds as people moved equipment around the warehouse, set up what appeared to be temporary work areas, and conducted meetings that sometimes lasted until dawn. The enhanced surveillance system captured everything in remarkable detail. Around this time, David asked me to expand my monitoring responsibilities. Beyond standard security surveillance, he needed detailed documentation of all activities around their facility for what he called operational compliance purposes. This meant reviewing recorded footage, creating timestamped logs of events, and maintaining archives of particularly important activities. The compliance documentation work paid substantially better than standard security duties, and David assured me it was just administrative record-keeping required by his international clients. I welcomed the additional income and found the work straightforward enough, essentially creating detailed reports about what I was already observing through the CCTV system. As weeks passed, the activities I was documenting became increasingly unusual. The warehouse would be reconfigured regularly, with temporary structures assembled and dismantled between sessions. Professional lighting equipment would be set up around specific areas, along with what appeared to be sophisticated recording devices. When I asked David about these activities, he explained that Industrial Solutions had expanded into creating training materials and documentation for their international clients. The temporary setups were necessary for filming instructional videos about equipment operation and safety procedures. The training sessions always followed similar patterns: extensive preparation involving equipment setup and lighting configuration, followed by what appeared to be filming activities, then thorough cleanup and equipment removal. My role was to document the timing and participants involved in these sessions for compliance purposes. The people involved in these training sessions seemed to change regularly, with new participants arriving for each filming event. David explained that this was because they were creating materials for different types of equipment and needed specialists with relevant expertise for each training video. What struck me as odd was how the participants behaved during these sessions. Unlike normal training or instructional filming, the people involved seemed distressed or reluctant. When I mentioned this in my reports, David assured me that realistic safety training required participants to demonstrate genuine concern about potential hazards. About 2 months ago, I started noticing technical equipment around the Industrial Solutions facility that seemed more sophisticated than necessary for creating training videos. Multiple camera angles, professional audio systems, and computer equipment that appeared designed for live broadcasting rather than simple recording. David explained that their clients required real-time access to training materials, necessitating live streaming capabilities. The enhanced technical setup allowed them to broadcast training sessions to international audiences who couldn't attend in person. This explained the sophisticated equipment and the emphasis on precise timing for their filming sessions. My documentation responsibilities expanded to include monitoring the technical aspects of these broadcasts, verifying that streaming equipment was functioning correctly, logging connection quality issues, and maintaining records of broadcast durations and viewer access logs that David's system automatically generated. The viewer logs were remarkable in their scope. Thousands of people from around the world were accessing these training broadcasts, with detailed analytics showing viewing patterns, geographic distribution, and engagement metrics. David's operation was clearly successful in reaching international audiences. 1 month ago, everything changed when I discovered what these broadcasts actually were. While reviewing archived footage for compliance documentation, I noticed that one of the computer monitors visible in the CCTV feed was displaying a dark web interface rather than the normal streaming platform David had described. The interface showed the same warehouse space I'd been monitoring, but it was labeled as a red room with viewer count displays and what appeared to be payment processing systems. The training sessions I'd been documenting weren't educational content. They were live torture and murder broadcasts being streamed to paying audiences on the dark web. The participants I'd watched weren't willing trainers demonstrating safety procedures. They were victims being murdered while thousands of people paid to watch. My detailed compliance documentation had been creating evidence of systematic killing for entertainment, and I'd been unknowingly facilitating the operation by providing security oversight. I realized that Industrial Solutions had never been an import-export company. The entire operation was designed to create a legitimate front for dark web red room broadcasting, using my security monitoring to ensure their activities remained undetected, while documenting everything for their own operational purposes. David's emphasis on enhanced security wasn't about protecting valuable equipment. It was about maintaining operational security for systematic murder. The professional CCTV coverage I'd been trained to monitor was partly for his own security, but also to create detailed archives of their broadcasts for premium subscribers. My compliance documentation hadn't been administrative record keeping. It had been creating detailed logs of murder events, participant information, and broadcast analytics that helped David's operation optimize their content for dark web audiences. I'd been an unwitting administrator for a systematic killing operation. When I confronted David about what I'd discovered, he calmly explained that I was already too deeply involved to simply walk away. Months of detailed documentation had created evidence trails that would suggest I was a willing participant, rather than an unknowing observer. My security reports contained information that could only have been gathered through knowing cooperation. David also revealed that my own activities had been under surveillance during this entire period. Security cameras monitoring the security office meant that my reactions to various broadcasts had been documented, showing my gradual normalization of increasingly disturbing content. This footage could be edited to suggest willing participation rather than unknowing observation. I managed to escape and contact the police, but the investigation has revealed the complexity of prosecuting dark web crimes. The broadcasts were accessed through encrypted networks that make traditional evidence gathering extremely difficult. Most of the direct evidence exists in digital formats that require specialized technical knowledge to authenticate. More problematically, my own involvement creates complications for the prosecution. Months of detailed documentation and security monitoring could be characterized by defense lawyers as evidence of willing participation. My gradual acceptance of increasingly unusual activities could be presented as knowing cooperation rather than professional obligation. The police have moved me to protective custody while they investigate, but they've explained that dark web red room cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute successfully. The technology provides multiple layers of anonymity for operators and viewers, while the evidence often relies on witnesses whose own involvement can be questioned. David's operation has apparently shut down and relocated since my escape, but the police believe it's part of a larger network that operates multiple facilities across the country. Industrial Solutions was just one node in a system that uses legitimate business fronts to hide systematic murder broadcasting. The most disturbing aspect is learning how many people were involved in David's network without understanding what they were facilitating. Delivery drivers, equipment suppliers, cleaning services, and utility workers, all unknowingly supporting an operation that broadcast murder to international audiences. My case has become a test for how effectively law enforcement can prosecute dark web crimes using traditional legal frameworks. The police are trying to build a case that doesn't rely too heavily on my testimony, given the complications created by my unwitting involvement in documenting the operation. I've spent weeks in debriefing sessions, helping investigators understand how David's operation functioned and identifying other potential facilities that might be using similar business models. The scale of the network they've uncovered is far larger than anyone initially suspected. The investigation has revealed that Industrial Solutions was generating substantial revenue through their dark web broadcasts, with thousands of subscribers paying premium rates for access to live murder content. The professional quality and systematic operation made their broadcast particularly valuable to audiences seeking authentic material. I keep thinking about all the victims I watched die through those CCTV feeds, not understanding what I was really observing. People who were murdered while I documented their final moments for compliance reports that helped optimize their killer's broadcasting operation. The police have assured me that my cooperation is essential for prosecuting David's network, but they've also explained that the legal process could take years and that successful convictions are far from guaranteed. Dark web crimes exist in legal grey areas that traditional prosecution methods struggle to address effectively. I'm writing this from a safe house somewhere in Wales, where I'll remain until the investigation concludes and the trial process begins. The police believe David's network is still active and that my testimony poses a significant threat to their continued operations. Tomorrow, I'm supposed to meet with prosecutors who will determine whether my evidence is sufficient to build a case against David's network. But they've warned me that the legal challenges are substantial and that my own involvement creates complications that defense lawyers will certainly exploit. The most terrifying realization is that David's operation was just one of many similar networks operating across the country. The business park model provides perfect cover for dark web red rooms, using legitimate commercial spaces to hide systematic murder broadcasting, while unknowing security guards document everything. How many other security guards might be unknowingly monitoring murder broadcasts? How many business parks might house similar operations? How many people might be facilitating systematic killing without understanding what they're really observing? The dark web has made it possible for these operations to exist anywhere, hidden behind legitimate business fronts, broadcasting authentic murder to paying audiences while ordinary people unknowingly facilitate their activities. The technology makes it easy to hide, to pay anonymously, to consume murder as entertainment. I never thought security work could lead to becoming a witness to systematic murder. I thought the biggest risks were dealing with break-ins or equipment failures. I never imagined that monitoring CCTV feeds could make me complicit in facilitating dark web red room operations. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so horrifying. I spent months watching people die while thinking I was just doing my job, creating detailed documentation that helped optimize their murders for entertainment value. Tomorrow's meeting will determine whether my testimony can help prosecute David's network or whether the legal complications make a successful case impossible. Either way, I know I'll never be able to work security again. The guard becomes the witness to systematic murder, and there's no way to unsee what I've documented. And somewhere out there, David's network is probably setting up new operations, recruiting new security guards who don't know they're about to become unwitting administrators for the next generation of dark web entertainment. The worst part about finding out your basement was used as a torture chamber isn't the bloodstains, it's realizing you helped pay for the soundproofing. 4 months ago, I was just a small-time landlord in Portsmouth, trying to make enough rental income to cover my mortgage payments. Now, I'm staying in a Premier Inn outside Winchester, and tomorrow the police are going to search the basement flat I've been renting out to what I thought was a quiet, professional tenant who's actually been broadcasting murders to dark web audiences while I collected rent money from upstairs. I inherited the house from my grandmother 2 years ago, a Victorian terrace that had been converted into 3 separate flats. The rental income from the upper 2 floors helps me pay the mortgage while I live in the main house. It's not a huge moneymaker, but it covers the bills and gives me some financial security in an uncertain economy. The basement flat has always been the most difficult to rent. It's below street level, doesn't get much natural light, and feels a bit cramped compared to the other units. Previous tenants usually moved out within 6 months, complaining about the atmosphere or finding somewhere brighter. I'd started to think it might remain empty long term. When Marcus Thompson contacted me about the basement flat, he seemed like the ideal tenant. Professional references, stable income from freelance consulting work, and he specifically requested a quiet, private space where he could work from home without disturbances. He was willing to pay 6 months' rent in advance and didn't mind the flat's limitations. Marcus explained that his work involved sensitive client consultations that required complete privacy and discretion. He needed soundproofing installed, which he offered to pay for himself, and requested that I minimize visits to the property unless there were genuine emergencies. This arrangement suited me perfectly, a reliable tenant who wanted to be left alone. The soundproofing work Marcus arranged was more extensive than I'd expected. Professional contractors installed industrial-grade acoustic materials throughout the basement flat, along with enhanced ventilation systems and what appeared to be specialized electrical work. Marcus assured me this was all necessary for his consulting business and that it would improve the property's value. After Marcus moved in, the basement flat became remarkably quiet. I rarely heard any activity from downstairs, which was exactly what he'd requested. He kept regular business hours, with occasional evening appointments, and maintained the property well. As far as tenancy arrangements go, it was ideal. Marcus also proved to be an excellent tenant in other ways. He always paid rent on time, never complained about minor issues, and generally required minimal management. He occasionally had visitors for what he described as client meetings, but they were always professional and discreet. The rental income was steady and reliable. About 2 months after Marcus moved in, he asked about making additional modifications to the basement flat. He wanted to install specialized lighting and upgrade the internet connection to support what he called high-bandwidth client communications. He offered to cover all costs and assured me the improvements would benefit future tenants. The internet upgrade was substantial: fiber optic cables, commercial-grade equipment, and backup systems that seemed excessive for normal home use. When I asked Marcus about the requirements, he explained that his consulting work involved real-time video communications with international clients who demanded professional quality connections. Marcus's business appeared to be thriving. He mentioned expanding his client base and taking on more complex projects that required enhanced technical capabilities. The basement flat was being equipped to professional standards that would allow him to offer premium services to demanding clients. Around this time, I started noticing unusual activity around the property. Delivery vans arriving at odd hours, often staying for extended periods, while Marcus supervised the unloading of equipment. When I asked about these deliveries, Marcus explained that his business required specialized equipment that needed careful handling and setup. The deliveries became more frequent and elaborate. Professional camera equipment, sophisticated lighting systems, and computer hardware that looked expensive and technical. Marcus assured me this was all legitimate business equipment necessary for his expanding consulting practice. I also noticed that Marcus had begun receiving visitors at unusual hours, late evening appointments that sometimes lasted until dawn, often involving multiple people who would arrive separately and leave at different times. Marcus explained that international clients required flexible scheduling due to time zone differences. The visitors were always discreet and professional, but something about their behavior seemed unusual. They would arrive with their own equipment, work intensively for several hours, then leave with everything they'd brought. Marcus described these as intensive consulting sessions that required complete focus and privacy. About 3 months ago, Marcus approached me about a different type of arrangement. He wanted to sublease the basement flat occasionally to other professionals who required similar facilities for their own consulting work. He offered to increase the rent substantially and assured me that all subletters would meet the same professional standards he maintained. The subletting arrangement seemed reasonable, particularly given the increased income it would provide. Marcus handled all the arrangements directly, screening potential subletters and managing their access to the property. I rarely saw these temporary tenants, but Marcus assured me they were all legitimate professionals. The subletting activity increased the overall usage of the basement flat, but it remained remarkably quiet thanks to the soundproofing Marcus had installed. Occasionally, I'd notice increased electricity usage or signs that multiple people had been using the space, but there were never any disturbances or complaints from neighbors. 2 weeks ago, everything changed when I received an unexpected visit from the police. They were investigating what they described as online criminal activity and had traced some suspicious internet traffic to my property. They asked detailed questions about my tenants and requested permission to examine the basement flat. The police examination revealed that Marcus's consulting business was actually a cover for something much darker. The basement flat had been converted into a sophisticated broadcasting studio designed for creating what they called dark web content. The soundproofing, lighting, and technical equipment weren't for legitimate consulting. They were for producing illegal streams. The investigators explained that the basement flat had been used to broadcast live violence to paying audiences on the dark web. The consulting sessions I'd observed were actually torture and murder sessions being streamed to thousands of viewers who paid to watch authentic suffering rather than staged entertainment. Marcus and his subletters hadn't been running a consulting business. They'd been operating a red room facility. The discreet professional visitors I'd seen were victims being brought to the basement for broadcasts. The extensive equipment deliveries had been setting up a professional murder studio in my own property. The police showed me evidence recovered from the basement flat, computer systems configured for dark web broadcasting, payment processing equipment for handling viewer subscriptions, and recording devices that had captured dozens of murder sessions over the months Marcus had been my tenant. Most disturbing was learning that I'd been unknowingly facilitating systematic murder for entertainment. My rental property had become a venue for dark web red rooms, and I'd been collecting rent money from people who were using my basement to broadcast torture and death to international audiences. The investigation revealed that Marcus's operation was part of a larger network that specialized in using rental properties as temporary red room venues. They would rent properties from unsuspecting landlords, convert them for broadcasting purposes, then relocate before attracting suspicion. The police explained that landlords like me were ideal targets because we provided legitimate cover for their activities while having minimal oversight of what tenants actually did in rented spaces. The rental arrangement created a buffer between their operations and law enforcement, making it difficult to trace their activities. My property had apparently been selected because the basement flat provided the privacy and isolation necessary for red room broadcasting, while the conversion to multiple flats meant that unusual activity would seem like normal rental property management. Marcus had been specifically looking for this type of setup. The legal implications of the situation are complex. While the police don't suspect me of knowing participation, my property was used for serious crimes, and I potentially face civil liability from victims' families. The rental income I received could be characterized as proceeds from criminal activity. More immediately, the property has been sealed as a crime scene while investigators gather evidence. I can't access my own home, can't collect rent from other tenants, and face substantial legal costs, even though I had no knowledge of Marcus's real activities. The investigation has also revealed the scope of Marcus's network. Similar operations have been discovered in rental properties across southern England, all using the same model of targeting small landlords who wouldn't closely monitor tenant activities. I'm apparently just one victim in a much larger scheme. I've been staying in hotels while the investigation continues, unable to return home and uncertain about my legal and financial future. The police have warned me that the case will take months to resolve, and that I may need to testify about my unwitting involvement in facilitating the operation. The most horrifying realization is how easily I was manipulated into providing the perfect venue for systematic murder. Every reasonable request Marcus made, soundproofing, privacy, professional equipment, was actually preparation for broadcasting torture and death to paying dark web audiences. The rental income I thought was helping secure my financial future was actually payment for providing a murder venue. The quiet, professional tenant I appreciated was actually a killer who needed somewhere discreet to broadcast authentic suffering to international subscribers. Tomorrow, forensic teams will begin a detailed examination of the basement flat to gather evidence about the scope of Marcus's operation. They've warned me that the investigation will uncover disturbing details about what happened in my property while I lived upstairs, unaware of the horror taking place below. I keep thinking about all the victims who died in my basement while I went about my normal daily routine overhead. People were being tortured and murdered for entertainment while I watched television, cooked dinner, and slept peacefully, never knowing what was happening one floor below. The police have explained that Marcus's network specifically targets properties where landlords live separately from tenants, creating the isolation necessary for red room operations while maintaining the legitimacy of a normal rental arrangement. My Victorian terrace conversion was perfect for their purposes. I've been advised to contact a solicitor about potential civil liability and criminal implications, even though I had no knowledge of Marcus's activities. The legal system struggles with cases where property owners unknowingly facilitate dark web crimes through legitimate rental arrangements. The financial implications are also substantial. Beyond legal costs, I face potential civil claims from victims' families, possible seizure of rental income received from Marcus, and the costs of restoring the property after forensic examination. My rental business may be effectively finished. I'm writing this from a premier inn outside Winchester, where I'll remain until the investigation concludes and I'm allowed to return home. The police believe Marcus's network is still active and that my cooperation with the investigation may have made me a target for retaliation. The most terrifying thought is how many other landlords might be unknowingly hosting similar operations. How many rental properties across the country might house dark web red rooms? How many small landlords might be collecting rent from systematic killers without realizing what they're facilitating? The rental property market provides perfect cover for these operations. Legitimate business arrangements that create privacy and isolation while deflecting suspicion from criminal activities. Landlords like me become unwitting accomplices to horror we never suspected was happening. Marcus's network understood exactly how to exploit the rental system, targeting properties and landlords that would provide the cover they needed while minimizing the risk of discovery. The conversion to multiple flats, the basement location, my preference for hands-off property management, it all made my property ideal for their purposes. Tomorrow's forensic examination will reveal the full extent of what happened in my basement flat while I collected rent money from upstairs. But I already know that I'll never be able to think of property rental the same way again. The landlord becomes an unwitting venue provider for systematic murder, and there's no way to unknow what your property was really used for. And somewhere out there, Marcus's network is probably targeting other landlords, looking for the next basement flat to convert into a dark web broadcasting studio. I never thought being a landlord could make me complicit in murder, but apparently collecting rent from the wrong tenant can turn your property into a venue for horrors you never imagined. What would you say if I told you that taking care of an elderly person could lead to becoming the star of a dark web murder broadcast? 4 months ago, I was just a care worker in Sheffield, trying to pay off my student loans and build some experience before applying to nursing school. Now I'm hiding in a service station outside York, and tomorrow night thousands of people are going to watch me become the entertainment in a red room that I helped set up without realizing what I was doing. I work for a private care agency that provides live-in support for elderly clients who want to remain in their own homes rather than move to residential facilities. It's demanding work, 12-hour shifts, difficult clients, family members who expect miracles, but it pays better than most jobs available to someone with just A-levels and a care certificate. The assignment that changed everything started in late September. I was assigned to provide overnight care for a man named Arthur Henley, an 80-year-old former academic living alone in a large Victorian house in Crooks. Mr. Henley had early-stage dementia and required supervision during the night, as he had a tendency to wander and had fallen several times trying to navigate his house in the dark. The house was impressive but dated, 3 stories, original features, and a basement that Mr. Henley used for storage. He'd been a professor of computer science at Sheffield University before retiring, and the house was filled with books, academic papers, and what appeared to be decades of accumulated technology. Old computers, servers, and networking equipment were scattered throughout various rooms. Mr. Henley was polite but distant during my first few weeks on the assignment. His dementia seemed relatively mild, occasional confusion about dates or names, some difficulty with complex tasks, but generally coherent and self-sufficient during daylight hours. He maintained a regular routine of reading, light gardening, and what he called his research projects in the basement. My role was primarily supervisory, ensuring he didn't wander outside at night, helping if he became confused or distressed, and managing his medication schedule. During the day, Mr. Henley was largely independent, so I had considerable downtime to study for my nursing school applications or catch up on personal tasks. About a month into the assignment, I started noticing some unusual aspects of Mr. Henley's routine. He received frequent deliveries of computer equipment, always paying in cash and insisting on handling the transactions personally. When I asked about his continued interest in technology, he explained that he was working on research projects related to his former academic work. Mr. Henley also had visitors at odd hours, usually late in the evening or very early in the morning. These weren't social calls from friends or family, but business-like meetings with younger people who would arrive with equipment or documents. When I asked about these visits, Mr. Henley explained that he was consulting on technical projects for former colleagues. The basement became increasingly off-limits during this period. Mr. Henley installed new locks and made it clear that his research space was private. I could hear equipment running constantly, humming servers, cooling fans, and what sounded like multiple computers operating simultaneously. The electricity bills must have been substantial. Around this time, Mr. Henley began asking me to help with some of his technical projects. Simple tasks initially: moving equipment, organizing cables, cleaning workspace areas. He offered to pay me extra for this assistance, which I welcomed given my financial situation. The work seemed harmless enough, just basic maintenance and organization. Gradually, Mr. Henley's request became more specific. He needed help setting up camera equipment in various rooms of the house, testing lighting configurations in different spaces, ensuring that recording devices had clear sight lines and optimal audio pickup. He explained that he was documenting his house's architecture and historical features for academic purposes. The camera installations were professional-grade equipment, far more sophisticated than anything needed for simple documentation. Multiple angles in each room, motion sensors, night vision capabilities, and centralized recording systems that fed back to his basement setup. When I commented on the complexity, Mr. Henley explained that thoroughness was essential for proper academic documentation. I also helped Mr. Henley test various aspects of his recording systems. He would have me move through different rooms while he monitored the coverage from his basement, adjusting camera angles and audio levels to ensure optimal capture quality. He said this was necessary to document how people interacted with historical architecture. During these tests, Mr. Henley would give me specific instructions about timing, positioning, and behavior. Stand in certain locations for predetermined durations. React to various stimuli he would introduce. Follow scripted movements through the house while he recorded everything from his monitoring station. The level of detail seemed excessive for architectural documentation. As weeks passed, Mr. Henley's dementia symptoms appeared to fluctuate dramatically. Some days, he seemed completely lucid and organized, managing complex technical projects with expertise that seemed inconsistent with cognitive decline. Other days, he appeared genuinely confused and disoriented, requiring assistance with basic tasks. I began to suspect that Mr. Henley's condition might not be as severe as initially diagnosed, or that he was deliberately exaggerating his symptoms. His moments of clarity always coincided with technical work or visits from his mysterious colleagues. His confusion seemed to occur primarily when I asked questions about his projects or tried to understand what he was really doing. 3 weeks ago, everything became clear in the worst possible way. Mr. Henley had asked me to test a new camera installation in the basement, claiming he needed to document some architectural features of the foundation. When I went downstairs, I discovered that the space had been completely transformed from a storage area into something resembling a professional studio. Multiple camera angles captured every inch of a central area that had been set up with restraints, medical equipment, and tools that clearly weren't for architectural documentation. Banks of monitors showed various live feeds from around the house, including rooms where I'd helped install cameras. Computer screens displayed dark web sites with streaming interfaces and viewer count displays. Most disturbing was seeing my own image on several monitors. Live feeds showing me in different rooms of the house, recorded footage from previous weeks, and edited compilations of my movements and reactions during Mr. Henley's tests. I realized that his architectural documentation project had been recording me extensively, creating content that was apparently being shared online. Mr. Henley appeared behind me, no longer showing any signs of confusion or dementia. He explained calmly that his condition had been largely fabricated to create a suitable cover for his actual work. Care workers were ideal subjects because they were isolated, had regular schedules, and were accustomed to working in private homes without supervision. He showed me the full extent of his operation. The basement was equipped for live streaming to dark web audiences who paid for authentic, unscripted content. The house had been converted into a production facility where he could create material featuring unwitting participants who thought they were just doing their jobs. Mr. Henley's research projects involved documenting potential subjects, testing their reactions to various situations, and gradually preparing them for final broadcasts. The care worker arrangement provided perfect cover, a legitimate reason for someone to be in the house regularly, explaining any unusual behavior or equipment to neighbors or family members. My weeks of helping with camera installations and testing had been preparation for my own broadcast. Mr. Henley's audience had been watching my daily routines, learning my behavior patterns, and anticipating the moment when I would transition from unknowing assistant to featured content. The visitors who came at odd hours weren't academic colleagues. They were part of a network that specialized in creating dark web entertainment using people who had no idea they were being groomed for participation. Care workers, domestic staff, delivery personnel, anyone whose job provided access to private spaces and isolated working conditions. Mr. Henley explained that tomorrow night's broadcast would feature the culmination of months of preparation. His audience had been following my story through surveillance footage, watching me gradually become complicit in setting up the very equipment that would be used for my final performance. I managed to escape while Mr. Henley was distracted with technical preparations, but I know the surveillance network extends beyond his house. They've been monitoring my communications, tracking my movements, and building detailed profiles of everyone in my life. Running might delay the inevitable, but it won't prevent it. Since leaving Sheffield, I've been moving between different locations, but they keep finding me. Messages sent to devices I thought were secure. People who seem to recognize me despite my using different names. Evidence that my movements are being tracked and reported back to Mr. Henley's operation. Yesterday, I received a package at the hotel where I'm staying. A package containing a tablet computer that showed live feeds from Mr. Henley's house. The basement had been prepared for broadcast, with professional lighting and multiple camera angles focused on the central area where I'd unknowingly helped position equipment. Text on the screen explained that tomorrow's broadcast was titled The Care Worker Series Finale, and that thousands of viewers had been following my story from the beginning. They'd watched me arrive for the assignment, gradually discover the truth about my situation, and attempt to escape. My real life had become entertainment for people willing to pay for authentic reactions to genuine danger. The message included details about my movements over the past few days, demonstrating that their surveillance had continued despite my leaving Mr. Henley's house. They knew which trains I'd taken, where I'd been staying, even what I'd eaten for my last few meals. Every step of my escape had been monitored and possibly broadcast to paying audiences. I could go to the police, but Mr. Henley has spent months creating evidence that would suggest I was a willing participant in his dark web activities. Surveillance footage of me helping install cameras, testing equipment, and following his instructions could be edited to support a narrative of voluntary cooperation rather than unwitting assistance. The care agency would have records of my assignment to Mr. Henley's house, my regular presence there, and my involvement in his technical projects. Without context, my actions would appear to show someone knowingly participating in the preparation of illegal streaming equipment. Mr. Henley's operation is too sophisticated, too well established, too experienced at managing unwilling participants. The dementia diagnosis provides perfect cover for his activities. Who would suspect an elderly man with cognitive decline of running a complex dark web broadcasting network? Tomorrow night, thousands of people will watch the conclusion of the Care Worker series. They've paid to see someone whose job involves protecting vulnerable people become vulnerable themselves. The irony is part of what makes the content valuable to Mr. Henley's audience. I'm writing this from a service station toilet because it's the only place where I can't see any obvious surveillance equipment. But I know they're still watching somehow. The tablet shows real-time updates about my location and activities, suggesting that their monitoring capabilities extend far beyond Mr. Henley's house. In roughly 10 hours, I'll have to decide whether to show up at the address they've provided or continue running. But Mr. Henley has demonstrated that his network can find me anywhere, and his audience has been promised a conclusion to my story. The most terrifying realization is that Mr. Henley's operation probably targets multiple care workers simultaneously. How many other people might be unknowingly helping prepare equipment for their own final broadcasts? How many elderly clients might be using their care arrangements as cover for dark web activities? The care industry provides perfect access to vulnerable workers who are isolated, poorly paid, and desperate for employment. Care workers enter private homes, work alone for extended periods, and are expected to assist with whatever tasks their clients require. It's an ideal setup for exploitation. Mr. Henley spent decades in computer science, developing expertise that he's now using to create sophisticated surveillance and streaming operations. His academic background provides credibility. His age and supposed medical condition deflect suspicion, and his resources allow him to maintain complex technical infrastructure. The dark web provides anonymity for his viewers, untraceable payment methods, and platforms that can't be easily monitored or shut down by authorities. He can broadcast authentic suffering to paying audiences without meaningful oversight or accountability. Tomorrow's broadcast is being promoted as authentic content, featuring genuine reactions from someone who doesn't understand what's happening until it's too late. Mr. Henley's audience values realism over performance, preferring to watch real people discover their situation in real time. I never thought my care work would make me a target for this kind of exploitation. I thought the biggest risks were difficult clients or workplace injuries. I never imagined that helping an elderly person could lead to becoming the star of my own murder broadcast. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so terrifying. I spent months caring for someone I thought was vulnerable, only to discover that I was the vulnerable one all along. Tomorrow's broadcast is titled The Final Shift. Mr. Henley's audience is expecting authentic reactions, genuine fear, and real consequences for someone who thought she was just doing her job. The care worker becomes the one who needs caring for, and there's no one left to help. Have you ever wondered what happens in office buildings after everyone goes home? 2 months ago, I thought the answer was simple. Cleaners like me come in, empty the bins, hoover the carpets, and lock up. Now I'm sitting in a McDonald's car park in Birmingham at 3 a.m, knowing that in roughly 18 hours, thousands of people on the dark web are going to watch me become the entertainment in a red room broadcast that I've been unknowingly preparing for weeks. I work for a commercial cleaning company called Spotless Solutions. We handle office buildings, retail spaces, and industrial sites across the West Midlands. It's night shift work, starting after business hours, finishing before the morning staff arrive. The pay isn't brilliant, but it's steady employment and the work is straightforward enough. Empty bins, clean toilets, vacuum floors, wipe down surfaces. Nothing complicated. 3 months ago, I was assigned to a new contract, a small office building in Solihull that housed various tech companies and startups. The building was modern, well maintained, and generally easier to clean than some of the older properties on my usual route. Most importantly, it paid better than average because the client had specific requirements about discretion and security. The building manager who showed me around was a woman called Sarah Chen. She explained that several of the companies working there dealt with sensitive projects and required enhanced security protocols. This meant signing additional confidentiality agreements, undergoing background checks, and following strict procedures about which areas I could access and when. Sarah was professional but friendly, taking time to explain the building's layout and the specific cleaning requirements for different areas. Some offices needed daily attention, others were cleaned weekly, and a few were marked as restricted access, requiring special permission and supervision to enter. The restrictions seemed reasonable for a building housing technology companies. The work itself was routine for the first few weeks. I'd arrive at 9:30, work through my assigned areas methodically, and finish by around 2 a.m. The building was usually empty, except for the occasional programmer or designer working late, but they kept to themselves, and I kept to my cleaning schedule. About a month into the contract, Sarah started asking me to take on additional tasks beyond standard cleaning. Moving furniture in certain offices, rearranging equipment, testing that various devices were properly connected to power supplies. She offered overtime rates for this extra work, which I welcomed given my financial situation. The additional tasks were always in the basement level of the building, which housed what Sarah described as a media production company. The space had been fitted out with professional lighting equipment, multiple camera setups, and sophisticated computer systems that required careful handling during cleaning. Sarah explained that the production company created content for online platforms and needed their equipment maintained in specific configurations. This meant I couldn't just clean around things. I needed to understand how the setup worked so I could clean thoroughly without disrupting their technical arrangements. The basement studio was impressive, but oddly sterile. Professional cameras positioned at various angles around a central area that could be reconfigured for different types of filming. Lighting rigs that could create various moods and effects. Computer workstations with multiple monitors showing editing software and streaming interfaces. What struck me as unusual was how clinical the space felt. Most media studios I'd seen on television or in films had a creative, lived-in atmosphere. This felt more like a medical facility or laboratory. Everything precisely positioned. Surfaces that could be easily sanitized. Drainage systems that seemed designed for more than just normal cleaning needs. Sarah began training me to operate some of the equipment as part of my cleaning routine. Not for production purposes, she assured me, but so I could test that everything was functioning properly after cleaning sessions. Turn cameras on and off, adjust lighting levels, verify that recording systems were operational. Basic maintenance tasks that would help the production team prepare for their work. During these training sessions, Sarah would have me stand in various positions around the studio while she operated the equipment from the control area. She claimed this was necessary to test camera angles and lighting configurations, ensuring that the technical setup would work properly for the production team's projects. I found myself spending increasing amounts of time in the basement studio, learning to operate more sophisticated equipment and taking on responsibilities that seemed beyond normal cleaning duties. Sarah always had reasonable explanations. The production company paid premium rates for comprehensive maintenance, and my technical aptitude made me valuable for tasks beyond basic janitorial work. Around this time, I started noticing that the building's internet usage was unusually heavy during my cleaning shifts. Wi-Fi speeds would slow dramatically, sometimes to the point where my phone couldn't connect properly. When I mentioned this to Sarah, she explained that the production company often uploaded large video files during off-peak hours to take advantage of better bandwidth. I also began finding evidence of recent activity in areas that were supposed to be empty during my shifts. Chairs moved, equipment that had been repositioned, cleaning supplies that showed signs of recent use. When I asked Sarah about this, she mentioned that some of the companies had staff who worked very late or came in during unusual hours to avoid disruptions. The basement studio started requiring more frequent and thorough cleaning. Sarah explained that the production company had increased their output and needed more rigorous sanitation between filming sessions. This meant using industrial-strength cleaning products, sanitizing all surfaces, and ensuring that the space was completely sterile before each use. One night, while cleaning the basement studio more thoroughly than usual, I discovered equipment I hadn't seen before. Medical devices, restraint systems, and items that clearly weren't related to normal video production. When I asked Sarah about these additions, she explained that the production company had expanded into educational content about medical procedures and safety training. Sarah also began asking me to test new aspects of the studio setup, verify that restraint systems were properly secured, check that medical monitoring equipment was functioning correctly, ensure that various tools and devices were clean and ready for use. She framed these tasks as quality control for educational content production. The requests became more specific and frequent. Sarah needed me to test the studio's soundproofing by making noise at various volumes while she monitored from the control room. Verify that the ventilation system could handle different types of atmospheric conditions. Check that the drainage systems could manage various types of liquid waste. About 3 weeks ago, Sarah introduced me to what she called the final testing phase of my training. This involved me spending time in the central area of the studio while she operated all the equipment simultaneously: cameras, lighting, recording systems, and monitoring devices. She claimed this comprehensive test was necessary to verify that the entire setup worked correctly for the production company's most demanding projects. During these sessions, Sarah would give me detailed instructions about positioning, movement, and responses to various stimuli she introduced through the studio's technical systems. Follow scripted scenarios, react to different sensory inputs, demonstrate how someone might respond to unexpected situations. She said this testing helped ensure that the studio could handle any type of educational content. The testing became increasingly intense and realistic. Sarah would simulate various emergency scenarios, test my responses to stress situations, and document my reactions to different types of physical and psychological pressure. She assured me this was all part of preparing the studio for realistic safety training content. Last week, everything became clear in the most horrifying way possible. I was conducting what Sarah had described as a final comprehensive test when I noticed that the computer monitors in the control room were showing more than just local recording interfaces. Multiple screens displayed what appeared to be dark web streaming platforms with viewer counts showing thousands of people watching live feeds. Sarah's production company wasn't creating educational content. It was broadcasting live torture and murder to paying audiences on the dark web. The basement studio was a red room, and I had been unknowingly preparing it for operation while gradually being trained to become its next victim. The weeks of testing had been conditioning sessions, documenting my responses to various situations and building anticipation among dark web viewers who had been following my story. My cleaning duties had been gradually transformed into preparation for my own broadcast, with each session bringing me closer to becoming content rather than maintenance staff. Sarah dropped all pretense of reasonable explanations when she realized I understood what was happening. She calmly explained that commercial cleaning provided perfect cover for red room operations. Cleaners work alone, have access to private spaces, and are expected to maintain discretion about what they observe. The enhanced security protocols, confidentiality agreements, and restricted access areas weren't about protecting technology companies. They were about maintaining operational security for dark web broadcasting. The basement studio had been designed specifically for creating authentic content using unwitting participants who thought they were just doing their jobs. My training sessions had been broadcast live to dark web audiences who paid premium rates to watch someone gradually discover their situation. The comprehensive testing, scenario simulations, and documented responses had all been content creation, building toward tomorrow night's final broadcast. I managed to escape while Sarah was distracted with technical preparations, but I know the surveillance network extends throughout the building and beyond. They've been monitoring my communications, tracking my movements, and building detailed profiles of my personal life during the months I worked there. Since leaving Solihull, I've been moving between different locations, but they keep finding me. Messages sent to devices I thought were secure. People who seem to recognize me despite my using different names. Evidence that my movements are being tracked and reported back to Sarah's operation. This morning, I received a package at the hotel where I'd been staying. A package containing cleaning supplies and a note explaining that tomorrow night's broadcast would feature the conclusion of the Cleaner series. Sarah's audience had been following my story from the beginning, watching me unknowingly prepare the very equipment that would be used for my final performance. The note included detailed information about my movements over the past week, demonstrating that their surveillance had continued despite my leaving the building. They knew which buses I'd taken, where I'd been staying, even what I'd bought from various shops. Every step of my escape had been monitored and possibly broadcast to paying audiences. I could go to the police, but Sarah has spent months creating evidence that would suggest I was a willing participant in her dark web activities. Surveillance footage of me operating cameras, testing equipment, and following her instructions could be edited to support a narrative of voluntary cooperation rather than unknowing assistance. Spotless Solutions would have records of my assignment to the building, my regular presence there, and my involvement in technical tasks beyond normal cleaning duties. Without context, my actions would appear to show someone knowingly participating in the preparation of illegal streaming equipment. Sarah's operation is too sophisticated, too well established, too experienced at managing unwilling participants. The commercial cleaning cover provides perfect legitimacy. Who would suspect a janitorial service of facilitating dark web red rooms? Tomorrow night, thousands of people will watch the conclusion of the Cleaner series. They've paid to see someone whose job involves maintaining spaces become the victim of the very space they maintained. The irony is part of what makes the content valuable to Sarah's audience. I'm writing this from a McDonald's car park because it's one of the few places with 24-hour lighting and regular security patrols. But I know they're still watching somehow. The cleaning supplies in this morning's package included a note with details about this location, suggesting their monitoring capabilities extend far beyond the office building. In approximately 18 hours, I'll have to decide whether to show up at the address they provided or continue running. But Sarah has demonstrated that her network can find me anywhere, and her audience has been promised a conclusion to my story. The most terrifying realization is that Sarah's operation probably targets multiple cleaning staff simultaneously. How many other people might be unknowingly preparing equipment for their own final broadcasts? How many commercial cleaning contracts might be cover for dark web activities? The cleaning industry provides perfect access to private spaces during off hours, with workers who are isolated, poorly paid, and expected to maintain discretion about what they observe. It's an ideal setup for exploitation by people who understand how to gradually transform routine work into participation in something much darker. Sarah's technical expertise allows her to maintain sophisticated surveillance and streaming operations while using commercial cleaning as cover. Her business credentials provide legitimacy. Her security requirements deflect suspicion, and her resources allow her to maintain complex technical infrastructure. Tomorrow's broadcast is being promoted as authentic content, featuring genuine reactions from someone who doesn't understand what's happening until it's too late. Sarah's audience values realism over performance, preferring to watch real people discover their situation in real time. I never thought commercial cleaning could lead to this kind of danger. I thought the biggest risks were chemical exposure or workplace injuries. I never imagined that maintaining an office building could lead to becoming the star of my own murder broadcast. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so terrifying. I spent months cleaning and maintaining the very equipment that's going to be used to kill me. Tomorrow's broadcast is titled The Final Clean. Sarah's audience is expecting authentic reactions, genuine fear, and real consequences for someone who thought she was just doing her job. The cleaner becomes the one who needs cleaning up after, and there's no one left to empty that particular bin. Silicon dreams have a way of blinding you to what's right in front of your eyes. The gleaming potential of innovation, the intoxicating rush of being part of something revolutionary. It creates a peculiar kind of tunnel vision that I now recognize as dangerous. My mother always said I was too trusting, too eager to see the best in people and situations. She wasn't wrong. That optimism nearly cost me everything when I joined Neurosync, the AI startup that promised to change how humans process information forever. I'd spent 4 years at Cambridge earning my computer science degree, followed by a soul-crushing 18 months coding banking software that paid well, but left me creatively starved. When the Neurosync recruiter approached me at a tech meetup in London, describing their vision of neural interface algorithms that could enhance human learning capacity, it felt like the universe was finally offering me a chance to do something meaningful. Their offices in Shoreditch occupied the top 3 floors of a converted warehouse, all exposed brick, polished concrete, and dramatic floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the open workspace with natural light. The kind of environment that makes you feel important just by existing within it. The interview process was grueling. 6 rounds of technical assessments, personality profiling, and strange hypothetical scenarios testing ethical boundaries. Looking back, I should have recognized those ethics questions as red flags, particularly the ones about privacy, surveillance, and the greater good. But I was dazzled by the founder, Victor Chen, a former neuroscientist turned tech visionary whose TED Talks had millions of views. His intense focus when he interviewed me personally made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced before, as if he recognized something in me that even I didn't fully understand. I started as a back-end developer on their core algorithm team, working punishing hours fueled by free gourmet meals and the cultish camaraderie that develops when a small group believes they're changing the world together. The company culture had all the startup cliches: meditation rooms, Friday drinking sessions, inspirational quotes painted on walls. But beneath that familiar veneer was something else. Something I initially couldn't name, but felt as a subtle wrongness that I dismissed as imposter syndrome. The first concrete oddity I noticed was the server room on the restricted 3rd floor. Most startups use cloud services rather than maintaining extensive on-site infrastructure. But NeuroSync had a substantial server farm that consumed enormous power and required dedicated cooling systems. When I asked about it, my team lead explained they needed physical servers for data security and proprietary hardware integration. It sounded plausible enough, though the biometric access protocol seemed excessive even for a security-conscious company. 3 months into my employment, I began noticing patterns in the network traffic that didn't align with our development activities. Massive data transfers occurred during odd hours, particularly between 2 and 4 a.m., creating noticeable system lag that affected our daytime work. When I mentioned this to my supervisor, his reaction was disproportionately severe, a flash of panic quickly masked by forced casualness as he explained it away as automated backup procedures. My curiosity might have ended there if not for Eliza, our network security specialist, who pulled me aside after a team meeting with genuine fear in her eyes. She'd noticed the same anomalies, but had traced them further, discovering encrypted streams being broadcast through obscure channels to destinations she couldn't identify. She'd raised concerns directly with Chen and was immediately reassigned to a different project with restricted system access. Before she left, transferred suddenly to the Singapore office, she slipped me an access key and a hastily scribbled note about server cabinet B7. For 2 weeks, I did nothing with that key. My position at NeuroSync had become the cornerstone of my identity. I'd cut contact with friends who couldn't understand my dedication to work, moved to a flat within walking distance of the office, even begun dating another developer whose life was similarly consumed by the company. The thought of jeopardizing all that felt impossible, even as the strange network patterns continued and 3 more employees were abruptly relocated after asking the wrong questions. It was a system crash at 3:17 a.m. that finally compelled me to act. I'd been working late, alone in the office, when every monitor simultaneously went blank before rebooting. In that brief window of system vulnerability, I caught a glimpse of an unfamiliar interface momentarily displayed on my screen. A dark background with a red timer and what appeared to be a bidding panel. It vanished so quickly I might have imagined it, except for the split-second image that remained burned in my mind. A live live video feed of what looked disturbingly like a person strapped to a chair in a sterile white room. That night, I used Eliza's key to access the server room, while the cleaning crew provided cover for my presence in the building. Cabinet B7 was segregated from the others, connected to independent power supplies and cooling systems. The servers themselves were standard hardware, but attached to them was custom equipment I didn't recognize. Components with no manufacturer logos, sophisticated transmission devices, and most alarmingly, a standalone storage system containing what appeared to be thousands of hours of video files with alphanumeric labels instead of conventional file names. I downloaded several files onto an encrypted drive, heart pounding so violently I feared it might trigger the motion sensors. Back at my flat, behind locked doors, and with my network connection disabled, I accessed the first file. What I saw destroyed every illusion I'd maintained about NeuroSync's noble mission. The footage showed exactly what I'd glimpsed during the system crash: a person restrained in a clinical setting. But this was no medical procedure or consensual research. The room was designed like a sterile stage set, with perfect lighting capturing every detail as masked figures systematically tortured the struggling subject. Overlaid on the video was the interface I'd glimpsed, a bidding system where unseen viewers could pay in cryptocurrency to determine what happened next, with a chat sidebar discussing the performance in grotesquely technical terms. I forced myself to watch 3 more videos, each featuring different victims in the same room, each following a similar pattern of escalating violence directed by remote bidders. In the background of one, a distinctively shaped light fixture was visible, identical to the designer installations in NeuroSync's executive conference room. These horrors weren't happening in some distant location. They were occurring inside our building, possibly on the sealed executive floor above the main workspace. The sickening realization crystallized all at once. The true product of NeuroSync wasn't neural interface technology. That was merely the public-facing operation that provided cover and funding for their actual business. A sophisticated dark web platform streaming interactive torture and murder to paying clients worldwide. The enormous server capacity, the odd hours network activity, the excessive security measures, all of it supported this nightmare hidden beneath the glossy veneer of innovation. I spent the night paralyzed by indecision, oscillating between calling the police immediately and recognizing the depth of evidence I would need to overcome the company's resources and connections. By morning, I'd formulated a plan to gather more concrete proof, to document everything systematically before taking it to authorities. I showered, dressed, and headed to the office as usual, the encrypted drive securely hidden in my apartment. The moment I badged into the building, I knew something was wrong. Security guards I'd never seen before stood by the lifts. My team lead intercepted me before I reached my desk, explaining that Chen wanted to see me immediately about a network security concern they'd detected overnight. As we rode the lift to the executive floor, an area I'd never accessed before, cold dread settled in my stomach. They knew. Chen's office was minimalist and cold, all glass and steel with views across London's skyline. He sat calmly behind a desk that probably cost more than my annual salary, flanked by 2 men whose stance and watchful eyes suggested backgrounds in something other than software development. With perfect composure, Chen explained that they detected my unauthorized server access, my file download, my violation of the confidentiality agreements I'd signed. He spoke of disappointment rather than anger, of necessary consequences for betrayal of trust. What followed was a proposal so casual in its monstrousness that I briefly wondered if I was hallucinating. Chen explained that NeuroSync's public business was merely a developmental phase. The real innovation lay in what he called experiential content, pushing the boundaries of human experience through unfiltered reality broadcast to select audiences. The neural interface technology wasn't separate from this. It was its ultimate evolution, creating direct sensory connections between paying clients and unwilling subjects. My technical skills made me valuable enough to offer a choice: join their inner operation with substantially increased compensation, or become content for it. As he outlined these options, a screen on his wall displayed a live feed of my flat, of the encrypted drive's hiding place, of my parents' home in Manchester. The message was clear. They controlled every aspect of my reality. I'd like to say I took the moral high ground, that I refused outright and accepted the consequences. The truth is more complicated and shameful. I hesitated. For 17 excruciating seconds, I actually considered the offer, mentally calculating survival probabilities, wondering if I could gather evidence from the inside, telling myself noble lies about infiltration and justice. Chen watched this internal struggle with clinical interest, as if my ethical crisis was itself a form of entertainment. What saved me wasn't courage, but circumstance. A notification on Chen's computer diverted his attention momentarily. Some issue with their broadcast server requiring immediate resolution. He instructed one of his associates to escort me to a holding room until he could continue our conversation. As we moved through a minimalist corridor, a building-wide power fluctuation caused the lights to dim briefly. My escort instinctively checked his earpiece communication, creating a momentary distraction. I ran through a fire exit, down emergency stairs, triggering alarms that actually worked in my favor by creating confusion. I emerged into Shoreditch's late morning bustle and didn't stop running until I reached Liverpool Street Station, losing myself in the commuter crowd. I abandoned my phone, my laptop, every device that could be traced, and used a stranger's mobile to call the one person I trusted absolutely, my former cybersecurity professor who had government connections. The investigation that followed moved with agonizing slowness, hampered by NeuroSync's political influence and technological countermeasures. By the time authorities gathered enough evidence for action, the primary servers had been wiped clean, key executives had disappeared overseas, and Chen himself had vanished completely. They found the broadcasting studio hidden behind biometric locks on the executive floor, forensic evidence confirming what had happened there. But the victims remained unidentified, their digital ghosts haunting encrypted channels beyond conventional reach. 3 years later, I live under a different name in a different country, working IT for a small manufacturing firm that still uses physical paperwork for sensitive information. I've testified in closed hearings, signed countless governmental secrecy agreements, and spent hundreds of hours in therapy trying to reconstruct a sense of normalcy. Sometimes I almost succeed. But late at night, when sleep evades me, I remember Chen's expression as he outlined my options, not malicious or sadistic, but genuinely curious, as if my moral anguish was simply another form of data to collect. And I wonder how many other brilliant startups with charismatic founders and revolutionary promises are hiding similar horrors behind their sleek interfaces and inspirational mission statements, offering technological salvation with one hand while recording our most private moments with the other, transforming human suffering into content for those wealthy and depraved enough to consume it. The most terrifying realization isn't that monsters exist. It's that they wear wireless earbuds, quote philosophers on Instagram, and raise billions in venture capital, and that we willingly invite them into every aspect of our lives, mesmerized by the promise of a better, more connected future, while they quietly claim terminal access to our humanity. There's a moment when you realize that boredom can be more dangerous than any addiction. It creeps up slowly, day after day, of the same routine, until suddenly you're willing to do almost anything just to feel something different. That's how I ended up in a situation that still keeps me awake at night, checking the locks on my door and wondering if those footsteps in the hallway outside are just my imagination. I was in my second year at Leeds, studying media communications. One of those degrees that sounds impressive but basically prepares you for nothing except disappointment. Living in a grotty flat in Headingley that I could barely afford on my student loan. Spending most evenings alone because my flatmates had either dropped out or transferred to proper universities where they actually learned useful skills. The flat was everything you'd expect from student accommodation that charged £300 a month. Damp patches on the ceiling, heating that worked when it felt like it, and walls so thin you could hear the neighbours arguing about whose turn it was to buy toilet roll. My room was just large enough for a single bed, a desk that wobbled if you looked at it wrong, and a wardrobe that smelled permanently of mildew. Most nights followed the same pattern. Lectures during the day where lecturers who'd never worked in media told us about industries they'd only read about in textbooks. Then back to the flat for microwave meals and whatever passed for entertainment on my ancient laptop. I'd scroll through social media, watch YouTube videos, occasionally attempt to do coursework that felt increasingly pointless with each passing week. That's how I discovered the forums. Not deliberately. I was researching something for an essay about digital communities when I stumbled across discussions that went deeper than anything I'd seen on mainstream platforms. People talking about privacy, digital freedom, the parts of the internet that existed beyond corporate oversight. It seemed more real than anything I was learning in lectures, more honest than the sanitized world of Facebook and Instagram. The transition to exploring these hidden communities happened gradually. Someone would mention a forum that required special access, or reference a discussion happening on platforms I'd never heard of. Gradually, I learned about tools that could hide your digital footprint, networks that existed parallel to the regular internet but invisible to casual users. It wasn't difficult to access once you knew where to look. There were guides, communities dedicated to helping newcomers navigate safely. Within a few weeks, I had access to a whole parallel internet that felt more authentic than anything I'd encountered in my media studies courses. Most of it was surprisingly mundane. Political discussions that would be censored elsewhere, marketplaces for things that existed in legal grey areas, communities of people who simply preferred to communicate without corporate surveillance. It felt like discovering a hidden city that existed alongside the one everyone else knew about. The first few months, I just observed, reading forums about digital rights, privacy advocacy, discussions of philosophy and politics that went deeper than anything happening in university seminars. There was something addictive about being part of these communities, people who seemed more intelligent, more informed, more aware of how the world actually worked than anyone I knew in real life. I started contributing to discussions, sharing thoughts about media manipulation and corporate control of information. My posts were well received, and gradually I began to build a reputation within certain communities. People started recognizing my username, inviting me to private forums with more exclusive content. That's where I first heard about live streaming communities. Not the obvious stuff, gaming streams and social media influencers, but underground networks that broadcast content you couldn't find anywhere else. Documentary footage from conflict zones, investigative reports that mainstream media wouldn't touch, real journalism that existed outside corporate control. The concept appealed to me immediately. As someone studying media, the idea of accessing unfiltered content, seeing events as they actually happened rather than how they were packaged for mass consumption, felt like the logical extension of everything I was learning about information control and narrative manipulation. The invitation came through a private message from someone I'd been discussing media theory with for several weeks. They'd noticed my interest in authentic journalism and wondered if I'd like to observe some live investigative work. A research collective, they called it, documenting social experiments and human behavior studies that universities wouldn't approve, but which provided genuine insights into psychology and social dynamics. They included access details for a private streaming platform and a scheduled time, that Thursday at 10:30. No explanation of what specific research I'd be observing, just an invitation to witness something most people would never see. The academic framing made it feel legitimate, important, like I was being offered access to cutting-edge research that would enhance my understanding of media and human behavior. The streaming platform was simple but professional looking. Clean interface, high-quality video feeds, chat functionality that allowed viewers to discuss what they were observing. When I connected at the appointed time, there were already about 15 people online, and they welcomed me warmly. The conversation was exactly what I'd expected from an academic community. People discussed research methodologies, shared insights about psychological principles, debated the ethics of observational studies. Someone mentioned they were pursuing a PhD in social psychology at Durham. Another person talked about their work in documentary filmmaking. They seemed like exactly the kind of intelligent, engaged people I'd been hoping to find in university, but never had. The research subject that night was social isolation and peer pressure. We were observing how an individual responded to being placed in an unfamiliar environment with limited social contact, measuring their psychological adaptation and decision-making under stress. The academic discussion was fascinating. People analyzed body language, predicted behavioral responses, shared relevant research from established psychology journals. The observation space was a small, clinical-looking room with white walls and professional lighting. A single chair faced multiple cameras, and monitoring equipment lined one wall. It looked exactly like the kind of setup you'd expect from a legitimate research facility, clean and organized, and obviously expensive. The subject was a young man, probably around my age, who'd volunteered for what he believed was a standard psychology experiment. The researchers explained through the chat that he'd been told he was participating in a study about decision-making under stress, which was technically accurate, but didn't reveal the full scope of what was being measured. What followed was subtle psychological manipulation presented as scientific methodology. The subject was asked to make increasingly difficult choices, each decision designed to measure his responses to social pressure and isolation. The academic observers discussed his reactions with clinical detachment, noting signs of stress and predicting how his behavior would change as the experiment progressed. I found myself genuinely engaged with the research. This was the kind of real-world psychology that my university courses only touched on theoretically. Here was an actual experiment, measuring genuine human responses in controlled conditions. The academic discussion was more sophisticated than anything happening in my lectures, and I felt privileged to be observing cutting-edge research as it happened. Over the following weeks, I became a regular participant in these observation sessions. Different subjects, different experimental scenarios, but always the same rigorous academic approach. The research collective was studying various aspects of human psychology: social conformity, authority compliance, stress responses, decision-making under pressure. Each session provided new insights that enhanced my understanding of media manipulation and audience psychology. The other observers were consistently impressive. Postgraduate students, academic researchers, documentary filmmakers interested in authentic human behavior. They shared reading recommendations, discussed theoretical frameworks, debated ethical considerations with the kind of intellectual sophistication I'd been hoping to find in university. These felt like the real education I'd been looking for. My contributions to the discussions were increasingly valued by the group. They seemed impressed by my insights into media theory and audience psychology, often asking for my perspective on how different experimental scenarios might be perceived by mainstream audiences. Gradually, I began to feel like a genuine member of the research community rather than just an observer. That's when they started suggesting I might be interested in contributing more directly to the research. The suggestion came casually, almost as an afterthought, during a particularly engaging discussion about experimental methodology. Someone mentioned that having perspectives from different academic backgrounds would enhance the research, and several people agreed that my media studies knowledge would provide valuable insights into audience psychology and narrative construction. The research coordinator, the person who'd originally invited me, explained that they were always looking for participants who understood the academic value of the work. Someone with my background could contribute both as an observer and as a subject, providing comparative data about how media-literate individuals responded to the same experimental conditions they'd been testing on less educated volunteers. I felt flattered. These people, whose intelligence and academic credentials I respected, were telling me I had something valuable to offer. They weren't just inviting me to observe research. They were asking me to become part of it, to contribute to studies that could advance understanding of human psychology and media manipulation. The logistics were straightforward. They operated several research facilities around the country, including one in Manchester that would be convenient for me to reach from Leeds. Sessions typically lasted a few hours, and participants were compensated for their time. More importantly, I would be contributing to research that had genuine academic value, work that might eventually be published in respected journals. I agreed without hesitation. The opportunity to be part of legitimate psychological research, especially research that aligned with my academic interests, was exactly the kind of experience that would distinguish my degree from the theoretical nonsense most of my classmates were learning. The arrangements were handled through encrypted messaging, which seemed appropriate for sensitive research that hadn't yet been published. They provided an address in Manchester's city centre and a time, the following Saturday at 2 p.m. I was told to bring identification and any questions I might have about the research methodology. The building was exactly what I'd expected from a legitimate research facility. Modern office block in Manchester's business district, professional signage, security desk in the lobby. I gave my name to the receptionist, who confirmed my appointment and directed me to the 7th floor. The research coordinator met me at the lift, an academic-looking woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She seemed exactly right for the role, speaking with the kind of measured authority I associated with university lecturers, but with more genuine warmth than most of my actual professors managed. The facility itself was impressive. Clean corridors lined with office doors bearing academic titles. research laboratories with expensive-looking equipment, meeting rooms where serious-looking people discussed what appeared to be legitimate academic work. Everything reinforced the impression that this was real research being conducted by qualified professionals. Dr. Mitchell explained the day's experimental protocol as we walked towards the observation room. They were testing responses to social isolation, combined with peer pressure, measuring how quickly intelligent individuals adapted their behavior when placed in unfamiliar social situations. My media studies background made me an ideal subject, she explained, because I would be more aware than most people of the techniques being used, allowing them to measure the effectiveness of these methods on educated, media-literate participants. The observation room was larger than it had appeared through the streaming platform. The same clinical white walls and professional lighting, but seeing it in person made the setup seem even more legitimate. This was clearly expensive equipment, operated by people who knew what they were doing. Other members of the research team were present, people I recognized from the streaming sessions, though seeing them in person made them seem more human, more relatable. They greeted me warmly, expressing genuine excitement about my participation in the research. Someone mentioned that my insights during previous observation sessions had been particularly valuable, and they were looking forward to seeing how I responded as a subject rather than an observer. The initial part of the experiment was exactly what I'd expected. Basic questionnaires about my background and psychological profile, measurements of baseline stress indicators, explanations of the monitoring equipment that would track my responses throughout the session. Everything was conducted with the kind of professional methodology I associated with legitimate academic research. Then they explained the specific experimental scenario. I would be placed in the observation chair and asked to make a series of decisions while being monitored by the research team. The decisions would start simple but gradually become more complex, measuring how my responses changed as social pressure increased. The other team members would observe through a live stream, documenting my reactions and discussing my behavior in real time. The academic framing made everything seem reasonable, even beneficial. This was research that could advance understanding of media manipulation and audience psychology. My participation would contribute to studies that might eventually help people recognize and resist propaganda techniques. The work had genuine social value, and I was privileged to be part of it. I took my place in the observation chair, facing the cameras that would broadcast my responses to the research team. The lighting was professional but not uncomfortable, and the monitoring equipment was less intrusive than I'd expected. Dr. Mitchell explained that the session would last approximately 2 hours, during which I would be asked to respond to various scenarios while my psychological and physiological responses were measured. The first scenarios were straightforward, simple decision-making exercises designed to establish baseline measurements. I was asked to choose between different options, while the research team observed my thought processes. The discussions I could hear through speakers in the room were exactly what I'd participated in during previous sessions. Academic analysis of body language, stress indicators, decision-making patterns. But gradually, the scenarios became more personal. Instead of abstract choices, I was asked to discuss my own life, my fears, my ambitions. The research team's observations became more focused on my individual psychology rather than general human behavior. Their academic discussions started including specific details about my background that I hadn't provided during the initial questionnaires. That's when I began to realize something was wrong. The information they were discussing, details about my university course, my financial situation, my family background, hadn't come from anything I told them during the session. They knew about my student debt, my poor relationship with my parents, my lack of close friendships at university, information that could only have come from extensive research into my personal life. Dr. Mitchell noticed my growing discomfort and explained that background research was standard procedure for this type of psychological study. They needed to understand participants' motivational frameworks to properly analyze their responses. The information had been gathered through standard academic channels, student records, social media analysis, public databases. Nothing invasive, just the kind of background research that any legitimate study would require. But the academic observers' discussions were becoming less clinical and more personal. They talked about my loneliness, my desperation for intellectual connection, my willingness to do almost anything to feel part of a community that valued my contributions. Their analysis was accurate but felt invasive, like they were dissecting my personality for entertainment rather than scientific understanding. The scenarios they presented became increasingly uncomfortable. Instead of simple decision-making exercises, I was asked to discuss my deepest insecurities, my most embarrassing experiences, my greatest fears. The research team's observations became correspondingly more intimate, analyzing not just my responses, but my motivations, my psychological vulnerabilities, my desperate need for validation. When I expressed discomfort with the direction the session was taking, Dr. Mitchell assured me that this was normal. Psychological research often required participants to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. The temporary discomfort I was experiencing was necessary for the research to have genuine value. Backing out now would invalidate hours of preparation and waste the opportunity to contribute to important academic work. The pressure was subtle but persistent. They reminded me of how enthusiastic I'd been about participating, how much I'd valued being part of the research community, how disappointed they would be if I couldn't follow through on my commitment. The academic framing made my reluctance seem immature, unintellectual, as if I was prioritizing my personal comfort over scientific advancement. But the observers' discussions were becoming less about research and more about entertainment. They talked about my responses as if I was performing for their amusement, rather than contributing to academic study. Their analysis of my psychology became increasingly invasive, dissecting my personality with the kind of casual cruelty that had nothing to do with scientific methodology. That's when I realized that the academic observers weren't researchers or graduate students. They were paying customers, anonymous viewers who enjoyed watching real psychological manipulation presented as legitimate research. The sophisticated discussions, the academic credentials, the professional facility, all of it was elaborate theater designed to make victims complicit in their own exploitation. I tried to leave, but Dr. Mitchell explained that the session wasn't complete. They'd invested significant resources in this research, and my participation was crucial for the data to have statistical validity. Leaving now would waste months of preparation and invalidate everything they'd learned. More importantly, I'd signed consent forms agreeing to participate in the full experimental protocol. The consent forms I'd signed so casually were more comprehensive than I'd realized. I'd agreed not just to participate in psychological research, but to continue until the academic objectives were met. I'd waived rights to withdraw consent during the session, acknowledging that temporary discomfort was necessary for legitimate research. I'd even agreed to confidentiality clauses that would prevent me from discussing the specific methodologies being used. The observers' discussions became openly predatory. They talked about how long I would resist, what it would take to break down my remaining psychological defenses, how much payment they were willing to make for specific responses. The academic pretense was dropped entirely, replaced by the casual cruelty of people who enjoyed watching others suffer. But I was still in the chair, facing cameras that broadcast my growing panic to anonymous viewers who were betting on my psychological breakdown. The professional lighting that had seemed so legitimate now felt harsh, clinical, designed to capture every detail of my distress for the entertainment of people I would never see. Dr. Mitchell continued to frame everything in academic terms, but her explanations became increasingly hollow. This was research into psychological resilience, she insisted. My responses were providing valuable data about stress management and social compliance. The temporary discomfort I was experiencing was necessary for the advancement of human understanding. The session continued for hours. Psychological pressure disguised as research methodology, invasive questioning presented as scientific inquiry, deliberate humiliation framed as academic observation. The anonymous viewers discussed my responses with the detached interest of people watching a particularly engaging television program, placing bets on how long I would maintain my composure. I don't remember exactly how I got away. The details are blurred by stress and the psychological manipulation I'd endured. I think there was some kind of technical problem with the streaming equipment, a brief moment when the observers were distracted, and I managed to leave the chair and find the exit. Or maybe Dr. Mitchell simply decided the session had provided enough entertainment for the paying viewers. I found myself on a Manchester street with no clear memory of how I'd gotten there. The business district looked normal, professional, exactly like somewhere legitimate research might be conducted. But I knew now that the building I'd just left was something else entirely. A facility designed to exploit people's desire for intellectual connection and academic validation. The journey back to Leeds was a blur. I sat on the train staring out the window, trying to process what had happened. The academic discussions I'd found so engaging, the research community I'd felt so privileged to join, the intellectual validation I'd craved so desperately. All of it had been designed to make me complicit in my own exploitation. That was 8 months ago. I've never reported what happened. Who would believe that a legitimate-seeming research facility was actually a sophisticated operation designed to exploit curious students? The academic credentials seemed real. The facility was professional, and I'd participated voluntarily after signing consent forms that probably covered every legal requirement. But I've learned to recognize the signs now. The casual invitations to observe research, the flattery about academic insight, the gradual escalation from observer to participant. The same patterns that led me into that room are being used to recruit other people, other students, who are bored and lonely and desperate for intellectual connection. I still get invitations occasionally, from different usernames on different platforms. Always the same academic framing, the same promise of authentic research opportunities. I delete them immediately, but I can't delete the knowledge that somewhere out there people are still being recruited for research projects that have nothing to do with advancing human understanding. The flat in Headingley feels different now. The thin walls and broken heating that once seemed like minor inconveniences now feel like vulnerabilities. I've changed my daily routines, varied my schedule, become more careful about what personal information I share online. But sometimes, late at night, when the building is quiet and I'm lying awake listening to footsteps in the corridor, I wonder if they know where I live. Because the thing about that kind of operation is that they don't just exploit you once and move on. They build profiles, gather information, create detailed psychological assessments that could be valuable for future projects. I was part of their research for months before I became a subject, and they learned everything they needed to know about what motivates me, what frightens me, what I'm willing to do for validation and intellectual connection. The academic community I thought I'd found doesn't exist. Real research happens in universities with proper oversight and ethical guidelines. But the desire for intellectual connection, for being part of something important and meaningful, is real enough. And there are people who understand how to exploit that desire, how to make isolation and boredom feel like academic opportunity. I'm finishing my degree this year, though media communications feels even more pointless now than it did before. The theoretical frameworks we study in lectures seem naive compared to what I've learned about psychological manipulation and social engineering. But I've also learned that the real world is full of people who understand human psychology better than any university course could teach. The chair is still out there somewhere, in a professional-looking facility with academic credentials and research equipment. And they're still recruiting participants, still finding people who are bored enough and lonely enough and desperate enough for intellectual validation to sign consent forms they don't fully understand. Sometimes I think about the young man I observed during my first session, the volunteer who thought he was participating in standard psychological research. I wonder if he ever realized what was really happening, if he managed to leave before they asked him to become a regular participant, if he's somewhere now checking logs and listening for footsteps and wondering if those casual invitations he receives are what they claim to be. Because once you've been in that chair, once you felt those cameras capturing every detail of your psychological breakdown for the entertainment of anonymous viewers, you never really feel safe again. The academic pretense might be dropped, the session might end, but the knowledge that there are people out there who enjoy watching human suffering remains. Have you ever had that moment when you realize you've been watching someone die and you can't tell if it's real or fake? That sick feeling in your stomach when you suddenly understand that what you thought was just morbid curiosity has turned you into something you never wanted to be. 6 weeks ago, I thought the most dangerous thing about the internet was accidentally clicking on spoilers for my favorite series. The film that started everything was called The Deep Web, or something equally dramatic. It was one of those low-budget thrillers that Netflix suggests when you've watched everything decent. The plot was about a journalist investigating online crime networks and discovering live-streamed murders where viewers could pay to watch real people being tortured and killed. Classic horror film stuff, completely over the top. But it got me thinking about whether any of it was actually real. I'd heard whispers about the dark web at college, older students talking about how you could buy anything online if you knew where to look. Drugs, fake IDs, stolen credit card details, but live murder streams? That seemed like the sort of thing that only existed in films. Still, curiosity is a powerful thing when you're 16, and everything in your life feels predictable and boring. My older brother Tom had left his laptop behind when he moved out for university, and I'd been using it for coursework since mine broke. Tom was studying computer science, so his laptop was loaded with all sorts of software I didn't recognize. One evening, while procrastinating on a history essay, I started exploring the programs he'd installed. Most were incomprehensible programming tools, but one caught my attention, something that seemed designed for accessing hidden websites. I won't pretend I understood the technical details, but after some Googling and following online tutorials, I managed to access what people called the dark web. It wasn't as exciting as I'd expected. Most of it looked like outdated websites from the early 2000s, with basic layouts and clunky navigation. There were marketplaces selling illegal things, forums discussing topics I didn't want to read about, and lots of sites that seemed abandoned or fake. But after a few hours of browsing, I found something that made my heart race. a site advertising authentic experiences and real-time interactive content with view accounts that suggested thousands of people were accessing it. The layout was more professional than most dark web sites I'd seen, with slick graphics and detailed descriptions of upcoming events. The site was clearly advertising red rooms, live streams where viewers could watch real violence happen to real people. The descriptions were clinical and detached, discussing subjects and scenarios, as if they were describing a nature documentary. What disturbed me most was how organized it all seemed. This wasn't some amateur operation. It was a business with regular schedules, different pricing tiers, and customer reviews. I told myself I was just curious, that I wanted to see if these things were actually real, or just elaborate hoaxes designed to scam gullible people. I created an account using fake details and started lurking in the forums where users discussed upcoming broadcasts. The conversations were casual, almost mundane. People talking about their favorite performers and comparing the quality of different streaming services. Most discussions focused on something called verification, the process of proving that broadcasts were genuine rather than staged. Experienced users shared tips for spotting fake content and recommended verified streams that had been authenticated by the community. The level of detail was disturbing. People analyzing physiological responses, discussing the authenticity of fear reactions, comparing the realism of different scenarios. After several days of reading these forums, I was convinced that at least some of the content was real. The users were too knowledgeable, too specific in their discussions, too focused on distinguishing authentic material from performances. They were talking about genuine violence as if it were entertainment, rating different streams based on the authenticity of the victim's suffering. The turning point came when I received a private message from someone with an established account. They'd noticed I was new and offered to help me navigate the more exclusive areas of the site. They explained that the best content required invitation access and that they could sponsor my application if I was genuinely interested in authentic experiences. Against my better judgment, I accepted their offer. Within hours, I had access to areas of the site I hadn't known existed. Higher quality streams, more detailed victim profiles, and viewer interaction features that allowed audiences to influence what happened during broadcasts. The technology was sophisticated. Multi-camera angles, real-time chat systems, and payment processing that handled thousands of transactions simultaneously. I watched part of one stream before closing my laptop and being sick in the bathroom. What I saw was undeniably real. Genuine terror, authentic pain, actual violence happening to someone who wasn't acting. The chat was full of users requesting specific actions, discussing the victim's responses, and rating the stream's quality as if they were reviewing a restaurant. I should have stopped accessing the site immediately, should have deleted the browser and tried to forget what I'd seen. Instead, I found myself returning every few days, drawn by a combination of horror and fascination. I never participated in the chats or made requests, but I became a regular observer of something I knew was deeply wrong. The users began to recognize my account name. Some sent friendly messages welcoming me to the community and recommending their favorite streamers. Others shared tips for accessing even more exclusive content or invited me to private viewing groups. I was becoming integrated into a network of people who consumed real suffering as entertainment. About 3 weeks into my exploration of the site, I received a message that changed everything. Someone had noticed my viewing patterns and wanted to discuss a special opportunity. They explained that new viewers were sometimes selected for participation in broadcasts, transitioning from observer to subject based on their engagement with the community. The message included details about my browsing history, the streams I'd watched, and the forums I'd visited. They knew I was accessing the site from Croydon, that I was using my brother's laptop, and that I typically browsed late at night when my parents were asleep. The level of surveillance was terrifying. They'd been monitoring me without my knowledge. More disturbing was their explanation of how recruitment worked. They didn't kidnap random people off the street. Instead, they identified curious observers who had demonstrated interest in their content and gradually drew them into participation. People who had already compromised themselves by watching, who couldn't report what they'd seen without admitting their own involvement. The message concluded with an invitation to a special viewing event in London. They offered to pay for travel expenses and promised I'd get to see behind the scenes of a professional broadcast. They assured me it was just observational, a chance to understand how the productions worked, but something about the invitation felt like a trap. I ignored the message, but similar invitations kept arriving. Different users reaching out with variations of the same offer. Opportunities to attend live events, meet other community members, or tour production facilities. Each message demonstrated more detailed knowledge of my personal life, my college schedule, my part-time job at a local shop, my family's routines. 2 weeks ago, the messages became more insistent. Someone had accessed my social media accounts and was sending screenshots of my online activity, threatening to share my dark web browsing history with my parents, college, and friends, unless I accepted one of their invitations. They'd also found my real name, address, and mobile number despite my using fake details on the site. That's when I realized I wasn't just a viewer anymore. I was being groomed as a potential victim. The friendly welcome messages, the exclusive access, the gradual normalization of extreme content. It had all been designed to draw me deeper into their network until I became complicit enough to be vulnerable to coercion. I deleted everything from my brother's laptop, changed all my passwords, and tried to pretend none of it had happened. But the messages kept finding me on different platforms. Text messages to my phone, emails to accounts I'd never used for dark web access, even physical letters posted to my home address. All contained the same basic threat: participate willingly or face exposure of my viewing history. The most recent message arrived yesterday, delivered to the coffee shop where I work part-time. Someone had been watching me closely enough to know my schedule and workplace. The envelope contained photographs of me, taken without my knowledge over recent weeks, walking to college, leaving work, sitting in my bedroom at night. The accompanying note explained that my audition period was concluding and that I was expected to attend a filming session tomorrow evening. The location was an address in South London, along with detailed instructions about arrival times and what to bring. The note explained that my session would be broadcast live to the community members who'd been following my journey from curious observer to willing participant. They'd been documenting my gradual involvement, turning my exploration of their world into content for other viewers. I've been hiding in Brighton since receiving that message, but I know they'll find me again. They've demonstrated access to surveillance that goes far beyond what I thought possible. They know my habits, my routines, my vulnerabilities. They've been studying me for weeks, learning how to manipulate and control me. The most terrifying realization is that this was always the plan. The easy access to the site, the friendly welcome from established users, the gradual exposure to more extreme content. It was all designed to identify and recruit potential victims. The dark web red rooms don't just broadcast random violence, they cultivate their own supply of subjects from curious visitors who think they're just exploring. I keep thinking about how many other teenagers might be following the same path I did. How many young people, bored and curious about the stories they've heard, might be unknowingly walking into the same trap. The internet makes it so easy to access these spaces, to become involved without understanding the consequences. Tomorrow night, thousands of people on the dark web will expect to watch a live broadcast featuring the teenage girl who started as a curious observer and became the main attraction. They've been following my story, anticipating this conclusion, paying for access to see how my journey ends. I could go to the police, but what would I tell them? That I spend weeks voluntarily accessing illegal content on the dark web? That I watched real people being harmed and did nothing to help them? That I'm now being blackmailed to participate in the same activities I observed? Any investigation would expose my own actions and probably result in criminal charges. The people running these operations understand this dynamic perfectly. They create viewers who become complicit through observation, who can't seek help without incriminating themselves, who gradually transform from audience to content. It's a perfect system for generating both entertainment and victims. I'm writing this as a warning for anyone who might be tempted to explore these areas of the internet out of curiosity or boredom. The dark web red rooms aren't just urban legends or film plots. They're real, they're organized, and they're always looking for new content. What starts as innocent curiosity can quickly become something much darker. Tomorrow's broadcast is supposed to feature a special guest, a teenage girl from Croydon who thought she was just exploring the internet and ended up becoming the star of her own horror story. The viewers are expecting authentic reactions, genuine fear, real consequences for someone who started as one of them. I don't know if I'll show up at that address tomorrow night or if I'll keep running. But I do know that somewhere in the depths of the dark web, people are waiting to watch whatever happens next. People who started as curious observers just like me, who gradually became consumers of real suffering, who now expect to see me transition from viewer to victim. The cycle continues, and curiosity remains the bait that draws in the next generation of participants. Sometimes the worst decisions really do start with boredom. Recently, I learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is satisfy your curiosity. That clicking the wrong link at the wrong time can change everything about how you see the world, and more importantly, how the world sees you. I'm a librarian at the University of Manchester, spending my days cataloguing books and helping students find obscure references for their dissertations. My relationship with computers extends about as far as checking emails and the occasional Netflix binge. But after my divorce last year, I found myself with far too much time on my hands and a flat in Chorlton that felt uncomfortably quiet most evenings. It started innocently enough. A colleague mentioned something called the dark web during our lunch break, describing it as this hidden internet where you could find anything. She was talking about buying prescription medications without a prescription. Nothing sinister, just trying to get around the ridiculous waiting times at her GP. The way she described it made it sound like some sort of digital black market, accessible but mysterious. I suppose I was bored more than anything else. After spending another evening watching repeats of Location, 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 and finishing a bottle of Malbec on my own, I decided to have a look. How difficult could it be? The Tor browser was surprisingly easy to download. Within about 20 minutes, I was browsing what looked like a much seedier version of the regular internet. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Drug marketplaces, fake IDs, stolen credit card details, the sort of thing that made me feel like I was doing something mildly rebellious without actually breaking any laws, just by looking. I spent a few evenings casually browsing, more fascinated by the structure of it all than interested in buying anything illegal. There were forums discussing everything from cryptocurrency to conspiracy theories. It felt like being an anthropologist studying some underground culture, safely removed from any real danger. Then I found the entertainment section. Most of it was what you'd expect: pirated films, illegal streaming sites, that sort of thing. But there were other categories too: live streams, private shows, interactive content. The prices were listed in Bitcoin, which meant nothing to me, but the descriptions were becoming increasingly disturbing. I should have stopped there. I know that now. But there's something about forbidden knowledge that makes it irresistible, isn't there? Like being told not to look down when you're standing at the edge of a cliff. The red room listings were buried several clicks deep in a section that required additional verification to access. The name itself should have been warning enough, but I'd convinced myself I was just exploring, just satisfying intellectual curiosity. The descriptions were vague, but clearly implied live-streamed violence. Real people, real harm, real-time interaction from viewers who could influence what happened. I told myself I'd never actually watch one. I was just researching, trying to understand how such things could exist. But the more I read about them, the more fascinated I became. Not by the violence itself, but by the infrastructure. How did they operate? Who were the people involved? How did payment systems work? How did they avoid law enforcement? The forum discussions were the most disturbing part. Users would discuss previous shows, like they were reviewing films on IMDb. They had favorite performers, they made requests, they shared technical tips for better streaming quality. They spoke about human suffering with the casual enthusiasm of hobbyists discussing model railways. I started checking the forums more regularly, not daily, but every few days. I told myself I was conducting research, maybe even gathering information that could be useful to authorities. Really, I think I was just drawn to the darkness of it all, the same way people slow down to stare at car accidents. After about a month of this casual browsing, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the regular forum users had a location tag that said Manchester, UK time zones in their posts, references to local news events. This wasn't some anonymous figure operating from Eastern Europe or Southeast Asia. This was someone nearby, someone who might shop at the same Tesco as me, someone who might have been sitting next to me on the bus. I started paying more attention to their posts. They were a frequent contributor, offering technical advice about streaming setups, discussing upcoming shows, sharing what they called reviews of past events. Their username was Viewer1, and they seemed to have some sort of insider knowledge about how these operations worked. Then they posted something that made me shut my laptop immediately. They mentioned a location, not specifically, but descriptively, an abandoned industrial building near the canal, somewhere in the direction of Trafford Park. They were discussing technical challenges with soundproofing and internet connectivity, complaining about the difficulties of operating in such locations while maintaining security and anonymity. I recognized the area they were describing. I'd walked past it several times during my weekend runs along the canal towpath. A derelict textile factory that had been empty for years, surrounded by overgrown wasteland and partially collapsed outbuildings. The sort of place you'd expect to find used needles and broken glass, not sophisticated streaming equipment. For several days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I tried to focus on work, my mind would drift back to that forum post. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as fantasy. Someone making up stories for internet points. But the technical details were too specific, too practical. This read like someone with genuine experience, not someone spinning elaborate fiction. I decided to walk past the building on my next weekend run. Just to look, just to satisfy my curiosity. If it looked completely abandoned and undisturbed, I could put the whole thing out of my mind. If there were signs of recent activity, well, I hadn't decided what I'd do then. The factory was about 3 miles from my flat, nestled between the canal and a section of wasteland that the council had been promising to develop for years. I'd run past it dozens of times before without paying much attention. It was just part of the landscape, another piece of Manchester's industrial heritage slowly rotting away. But this time, I looked more carefully. The main building was 5 stories of red brick and broken windows, exactly the sort of structure that would normally be completely inaccessible to anyone without climbing equipment. But around the back, partially hidden by overgrown shrubs, was a section where the ground floor windows had been carefully boarded up, rather than just smashed. The boards were weathered, but looked more recent than the general decay of the building. More concerning were the subtle signs of recent human activity. A section of grass that had been flattened by foot traffic, cigarette butts that weren't yet soggy from multiple rainfalls, a section of chain link fence that had been cut and carefully repositioned to look intact from a distance. I stood there for probably 20 minutes, pretending to stretch after my run, while actually studying the building. No obvious security cameras, but that didn't mean much. No sounds from inside, but the walls were thick brick that would muffle most noise. No vehicles parked nearby, but there were several access routes that would allow discreet arrival and departure. I should have called the police. I should have reported my suspicions and let trained investigators handle whatever was happening. Instead, I went home and checked the forums again. Viewer 1 had posted an update. They were planning another show for the following weekend, Saturday night, sometime after midnight. They mentioned improved audio quality, better camera angles, and special interactive features for premium subscribers. The casual tone of the post, discussing human suffering like a product launch, made me feel physically sick. I spent the entire week in a state of anxious distraction. My colleagues at the library noticed I was distant and distracted. I caught myself staring out the window during meetings, my mind replaying forum posts and imagining what might be happening in that abandoned building. Friday night, I barely slept. I kept checking the forums, watching for updates, looking for any indication that I'd misunderstood something. But Viewer 1 continued posting technical updates and responding to questions from other users. Everything suggested that something was definitely planned for the following evening. Saturday evening, I tried to distract myself with normal activities. I cooked dinner, watched television, started reading a book, but by 11 o'clock, I couldn't concentrate on anything except what might be happening just a few miles away. I put on dark clothing and walked to the canal. I told myself I was just going to observe from a distance, maybe document anything suspicious and report it to authorities on Monday morning. I wasn't planning to intervene directly or put myself in danger. The towpath was completely deserted, which wasn't unusual for a Saturday night in October. The streetlights were spaced far apart, creating long stretches of shadow between pools of orange light. By the time I reached the factory, it was nearly midnight. The building looked exactly the same as it had during my daytime visit, but now there were subtle signs of activity. A faint glow from one of the upper floor windows, barely visible behind what looked like blackout material. The sound of a generator running somewhere inside, so quiet it was almost masked by ambient city noise. I found a position behind some overgrown shrubs where I could watch the building without being easily spotted. The generator sound continued, joined occasionally by other mechanical noises I couldn't identify. Once, I thought I heard voices, but I might have been imagining it. Around 1 o'clock, a van arrived. It parked behind the building, in an area not visible from the main road. 2 figures got out and entered through what must have been a rear entrance. They moved with the purposeful efficiency of people following a familiar routine. 30 minutes later, another vehicle arrived, then another. By 2 o'clock, there were 4 vehicles parked behind the building, all positioned to avoid casual observation. I should have left then. I should have gathered whatever evidence I could and reported it to authorities. Instead, I found myself moving closer to the building, trying to find a position where I might be able to see or hear more clearly. The rear of the building had several ground floor windows that were boarded up, but not completely sealed. Through gaps in the boards, I caught glimpses of artificial light and shadows moving inside. The generator noise was louder here, joined by the hum of electronic equipment and occasional voices. I was crouched behind an old shipping container, probably 30 yards from the building, when I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. I turned around slowly, my heart hammering, expecting to see security guards or police officers. Instead, I saw a figure in dark clothing, walking directly towards my hiding position with obvious intent. They weren't trying to be stealthy. They knew exactly where I was. The figure stopped about 10 feet away and spoke in a quiet, conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than any aggressive challenge would have been. They told me I'd been expected. They said Viewer 1 had noticed unusual traffic patterns in the forums, someone asking the right questions and showing interest in specific locations. They'd been monitoring forum users more carefully lately, tracking digital footprints and cross-referencing with local activity. They explained that I'd been identified and followed during my previous visit to the building. My regular forum browsing had created a profile that made me interesting to them, someone with genuine curiosity, but no obvious law enforcement connections. They offered me a choice. I could walk away immediately, delete my forum accounts, and never return to this area or these websites. Or I could satisfy my curiosity completely, see exactly what I'd been researching, and become part of their community. They made it sound like a reasonable business proposition. They weren't threatening me with violence, just explaining my options with the calm professionalism of someone making a sales pitch. But the implication was clear. Walking away would require their trust that I'd remain silent about what I'd discovered. Staying would require my participation in activities I'd only observed from a distance. I stood there in the darkness, 30 yards from a building where I suspected horrible things were happening, being offered a choice between complicity and silence. Neither option felt like escape. I told them I needed to think about it. They said I had until the next Saturday to decide. They gave me a secure messaging app and an encrypted contact. They said Viewer 1 was particularly interested in meeting me, someone who'd shown such dedicated research interest in their work. I walked home in a state of shock that I'm still not sure I've recovered from. The casual professionalism of the encounter was almost more disturbing than any direct threat would have been. They spoke about human suffering like a business operation, about my potential involvement like a job interview. It's been 3 weeks since that conversation. I haven't returned to the forums. I haven't used the contact information they gave me. I've avoided running anywhere near that area of the canal. But I haven't called the police either, because part of me knows they were right about one thing. I had been researching their activities with genuine fascination, not just horror. I had been drawn to the forbidden knowledge, the glimpse into darkness that most people never see. They hadn't completely misread my motivations, and because another part of me knows that if they were sophisticated enough to identify and track me through forum activity, they're probably sophisticated enough to monitor whether I contact authorities. The choice they offered me probably wasn't as simple as they made it sound. I still check my usual websites. I still go to work at the library. I still run along different sections of canal, avoiding the area near Trafford Park. I try to maintain normal routines and convince myself that the whole experience was some sort of elaborate hoax or misunderstanding. But sometimes, late at night, I find myself thinking about Viewer One's invitation, about what exactly I might learn if I satisfied my curiosity completely, about whether the line between observer and participant is as clear as I'd always assumed. The secure messaging app is still installed on my phone. The encrypted contact information is still saved in my notes. Every Saturday evening, I find myself wondering what choice I'm actually going to make. I used to obsessively check my reflection in shop windows, constantly rehearsing expressions in my mind, imagining my face on billboards and magazine covers. That desperate hunger for validation, for someone to finally see the potential I believe burned inside me. It's embarrassing to admit how all-consuming it was, but that's what makes places like Elite Casting so dangerous. They know exactly what you're willing to risk when you've convinced yourself that fame is just one lucky breakaway. I found the casting call on an industry forum I'd been following for months, one of those semi-professional websites where legitimate opportunities occasionally surface among the scams. The post stood out because it wasn't promising the usual vague exposure or unpaid work. Instead, it offered a substantial daily rate for a luxury fashion campaign, specifically seeking distinctive faces, not conventional beauty. My heart raced as I read those words. I'd been told countless times by well-meaning friends that my look was too unique for commercial modeling, a polite way of saying I wasn't conventionally attractive enough. But here was someone explicitly wanting what I had. The application process seemed thorough, which only reinforced my belief in its legitimacy. I submitted my measurements, recent photographs, and a brief bio highlighting my limited experience, a student fashion show at university, a friend's photography project, nothing that would impress a real agency. 3 days later, an email arrived confirming I'd been shortlisted and inviting me to an in-person casting at their Leeds office. The message included professional-looking documentation, an NDA emphasizing the confidential nature of the upcoming campaign, details about the renowned but unnamed designer, and what to wear to the casting. I spent hours selecting the perfect minimalist outfit, practicing walking with the straight-backed confidence I'd observed in models on runway videos. The address led me to a converted textile mill in the industrial quarter of the city, one of those red brick Victorian buildings that developers had transformed into sleek, modern office spaces while preserving the original facade. Elite Casting occupied the entire top floor, accessible via a service lift that required a code texted to me that morning. Everything about the space radiated exclusivity and professionalism. Polished concrete floors, exposed brick walls adorned with black and white campaign photographs. Minimalist furniture that looked expensive in its deliberate simplicity. Large windows flooded the reception area with natural light, highlighting the dust particles drifting lazily through the air, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that felt separate from the gritty streets below. A receptionist with immaculate makeup took my details, asked me to sign another NDA, and directed me to a waiting area where 3 other potential models sat scrolling through their phones. They all had that same distinctive quality mentioned in the casting call. Interesting faces rather than conventional beauty. I felt simultaneously reassured and competitive, studying their features while pretending to check my own phone. None of us spoke, each wrapped in our private anticipation. The silence broken only by the occasional sound of a door opening down the corridor as candidates emerged from their castings. After 40 minutes that stretched like hours, an assistant called my name. I followed her through a series of corridors to a large studio space where 3 people sat behind a table laden with laptops and documents. They introduced themselves as the casting director, the campaign photographer, and a representative from the design house. Their professional demeanor, their casual references to major fashion weeks and well-known industry figures. Every detail reinforced the legitimacy of the operation. I stood on a marked spot under perfectly positioned lights while they asked standard questions about my experience and availability, making notes on tablets as I responded. The casting director explained that this campaign was taking an innovative approach, focusing on unfiltered, authentic content that would be released across multiple platforms. The concept sounded vague yet impressive, full of buzzwords about breaking boundaries and challenging conventional beauty standards. He then asked if I would be comfortable doing a brief screen test to assess how I moved on camera. This, he explained, was more important than traditional modeling experience, as the campaign would involve video content for social media as well as still photography. The photographer led me to an adjoining room, smaller, more intimate, with a simple white backdrop and professional lighting equipment. A high-definition camera was mounted on a tripod, pointing at a plain wooden chair in the center of the space. The setup seemed standard enough, though I remember noticing there were no windows in this room, unlike the rest of the office. The photographer explained that she needed to adjust some equipment and would be back momentarily, leaving me alone to get comfortable in the space. As I waited, I noticed a small red light blinking on the camera. It was already recording. Strange, but perhaps this was part of the process, capturing natural moments rather than posed ones. I also became aware of how quiet the room was, a complete absence of the ambient noise that had filled the rest of the office. The walls appeared thicker here, possibly soundproofed for recording purposes. These details registered as professional considerations rather than warning signs, evidence of a high-end operation rather than something sinister. The photographer returned with what she described as a simple outfit for the screen test. A plain black tank top and shorts that seemed more suitable for a fitness shoot than high fashion. When I hesitantly mentioned this discrepancy, she explained that they needed to see how different body types moved naturally before designing the final campaign looks. It sounded reasonable enough at the time, though now the memory makes me nauseous. I changed behind a small partition, increasingly aware of the camera's unblinking eye, wondering if it had been turned off during this process, but too intimidated by the professional environment to ask. The screen test began innocuously. Simple poses, turning to show different angles, basic movement sequences. But gradually, the photographer's instructions shifted. She asked me to show more skin, to adjust the clothing to reveal more of my shoulders, my collarbone. The directions became increasingly specific about how I should move, how I should touch my own skin, how I should express certain emotions. Each request was presented as a standard industry practice, each boundary pushed with the assurance that this was normal, that major models did this every day, that my hesitation only revealed my inexperience. I remember the exact moment when discomfort crystallized into fear. The photographer had stepped out again, supposedly to consult with the casting director about the next sequence. I rose from the chair, intending to stretch my legs, and noticed a small panel on the wall behind the camera had slid open slightly, revealing what appeared to be another room beyond, darker, filled with additional screens showing different angles of the space I occupied. For a brief second, I glimpsed multiple figures watching intently. Then the panel silently closed. My instinct screamed to leave immediately, but doubt crept in. Perhaps this was normal, a separate control room for technical staff. I'd never been to a professional casting before. Maybe this was standard procedure I was misinterpreting due to nervousness. The thought of walking out, of potentially burning bridges in an industry I desperately wanted to enter, made me hesitate just long enough for the photographer to return, this time with a male assistant carrying additional equipment. The atmosphere shifted subtly. The photographer's instructions became colder, more demanding. The assistant positioned what appeared to be restraints on the chair, explaining them as posing aids that would help maintain specific positions for longer sequences. When I expressed concern, they exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. The photographer reminded me of the confidentiality agreement I'd signed, emphasizing the competitive nature of the industry and how many aspiring models would gladly take my place if I wasn't serious about the opportunity. I agreed to continue, allowing them to secure my wrist to the chair's armrests with what they called comfort straps, thinking I could ask to be released if things went further than I was comfortable with. It was only when they fastened the final restraint across my ankles that I realized the terrible miscalculation I'd made. These weren't posing aids. They were proper restraints, tightening rather than loosening when I pulled against them. The photographer's demeanor transformed entirely. She stepped back, assessed me with clinical detachment, then spoke into a small microphone attached to her lapel, confirming that the subject was secured and they were ready to begin the real casting. The assistant wheeled in additional equipment, another camera on a movable arm that could capture close-up angles, a laptop connected to what appeared to be a broadcasting setup. With growing horror, I watched as they adjusted settings on the computer, revealing a web page with a dark background and red text in a language I didn't recognize. Below this was an English interface showing a live stream count, a bidding section, and a chat window where messages were already appearing. This wasn't a modeling casting. It was a dark web broadcast, with me as the unwitting content. The photographer explained in detached terms what would happen next. This was indeed a casting, but not for a fashion campaign. They were talent scouts for an exclusive online network that provided specialized content to paying subscribers around the world. The restraint session was being broadcast live as a preview, with viewers already placing bids for what would follow. Those with the highest bids would dictate what happened to me over the next several hours. My consent was irrelevant. My signature on their falsified documents would be manipulated to suggest I had agreed to everything. I'll spare you the details of what followed, though the memories replay in vivid, unwanted detail whenever I close my eyes. I can still feel the clinical touch of latex gloves against my skin, still hear the mechanical whir of the camera adjusting for close-ups, still see the laptop screen flickering with incoming messages from faceless viewers suggesting increasingly depraved scenarios. Throughout it all, they maintained that professional facade, discussing angles and lighting as if this were indeed just another fashion shoot, the mundane normality of their technical conversation a grotesque counterpoint to what they were documenting. It ended abruptly when an alarm sounded elsewhere in the building. A fire drill, a security breach. I never learned what. The assistant hurriedly released my restraints, while the photographer packed essential equipment. They seemed practiced at rapid evacuation, suggesting this wasn't their first emergency exit. I was warned that any attempt to report what had happened would result in the footage being released publicly, with my personal details attached. They had my address, my full name, my social media accounts, all freely provided in my eager application. In the chaos, I managed to grab my original clothes and fled down a back stairwell, emerging into an alley behind the building where other office workers were gathering at a fire assembly point, entirely unaware of what had occurred floors above them. I walked away as calmly as I could manage on trembling legs, fighting the urge to run until I had turned several corners. The police report I filed the next day went nowhere. The address I led them to housed a legitimate business consultancy firm that had occupied the space for years. Elite Casting had never existed there. The website where I'd found the original posting had no record of it. The emails I'd received were sent from accounts that no longer existed. Even the photographs I'd submitted had vanished from my sent items folder, as if someone had accessed my accounts and meticulously erased every digital trace of the interaction. 2 weeks later, a message appeared in my spam folder. A link, nothing else. Against every rational instinct, I clicked it. It led to a countdown timer on a black background, beneath which was a thumbnail image of me, restrained in that chair, my face partially obscured, but clearly recognizable to anyone who knew me. The countdown showed 3 days remaining. I deleted my social media accounts that same hour, withdrew from university the following day, and moved back to my parents' home in Northumberland by the end of the week, claiming a mental health crisis that wasn't entirely a lie. The countdown expired without consequence that I'm aware of. Perhaps it was just a final psychological torture, or perhaps the content is circulating in corners of the internet I'll never visit. I've changed my name now, dyed my hair, altered my appearance as much as possible without surgery. I work nights at a supermarket distribution center where interactions are minimal and photographs non-existent. Sometimes I think about the others in that waiting room, wonder if they met the same fate or managed to escape. I've searched missing persons reports, scanned news stories for anything that might connect to what happened, but found nothing conclusive. Elite Casting, or whatever they really call themselves, are professionals at covering their tracks. The most haunting part isn't what they did, it's how expertly they exploited my deepest desires. They knew exactly what to offer, exactly what language would bypass my natural caution. They understood that my hunger to be seen, to be validated, would blind me to the warning signs that now seem so glaringly obvious. They recognized something desperate in me that I hadn't fully acknowledged to myself. That's the real horror of the dark web, not just what happens there, but how it intersects with the ordinary world, how easily normal ambitions can lead you down twisted corridors. The monsters don't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they sit behind casting tables in well-lit offices, wearing designer clothes and speaking the language of opportunity. And sometimes, the thing that makes you vulnerable isn't weakness, but wanting. The perfectly human desire to be chosen, to be special, to be seen. I can't bear to be photographed now. I flinch when friends raise phones for group pictures, make excuses to step away. I've stuck tape over every camera lens on every device I own, because I know that somewhere out there, people are still watching me through that first recording. Strangers who paid to see me broken down frame by frame. And somewhere, another casting call is being written, another trap set. another desperate, hopeful preparing for their big break, without realizing it's really just a breaking. Okay, so this is what happened to me, and I'm still not entirely sure how I ended up in this situation. 3 months ago, I was just a postgraduate student in Manchester, looking for someone to share the rent on a decent 2-bedroom flat near the university. Now I'm locked in a bathroom, in a Premier Inn somewhere outside Liverpool, and in roughly 12 hours, thousands of people are going to watch me die on a live stream that my flatmate has been preparing for weeks. I should probably start from the beginning. I'm 23, studying for a master's degree in social work in Manchester. The course is demanding but rewarding. We spend a lot of time discussing vulnerable populations and how to protect people from exploitation. The irony of my current situation isn't lost on me. Finding affordable accommodation in Manchester is nearly impossible on a student budget, so when I saw an advert for someone looking to share a spacious flat in Didsbury, I jumped at the chance. The rent was reasonable, the location was perfect, and the flatmate seemed normal enough based on our brief text exchanges. Her name was Emma. She worked from home doing something with computers, and she preferred a quiet environment for studying and working. Emma was in her late 20s, softly spoken and obsessively tidy. She kept strange hours, often up all night working, sleeping during the day. But she was respectful about noise levels and always paid her share of bills on time. She'd converted the larger bedroom into both a sleeping area and an elaborate home office setup with multiple monitors, professional lighting equipment, and what appeared to be streaming gear. When I asked about her work, Emma explained that she created content for online platforms. She was deliberately vague about the specifics, mentioning something about niche audiences and specialized streaming services. I assumed she was doing gaming content or tutorials. Lots of people make decent money creating online content these days, and her equipment certainly looked professional enough. Emma rarely had visitors, rarely went out during normal hours, and seemed to live entirely online. She ordered everything for delivery, groceries, meals, even basic household items. The only times I saw her leave the flat were for brief walks at odd hours, usually very late at night or very early in the morning. She seemed almost allergic to natural daylight. About a month after moving in, I started noticing some odd things about Emma's routine. She would receive packages almost daily, not just normal deliveries, but items that required signature confirmation and seemed unusually heavy or bulky. When I asked about them casually, she explained that her work required specialized equipment that needed regular updates or replacements. The packages often arrived when I was at university, but occasionally I'd be home to sign for them. Medical supplies, plastic sheeting, industrial cleaning products, and items I couldn't identify wrapped in unmarked packaging. When I mentioned that some of the delivery content seemed unusual, Emma became defensive and explained that her content creation required props and materials that might seem strange to people unfamiliar with her industry. I also started noticing sounds from Emma's room at night, not just typing or video calls, but movement of heavy objects, occasional thuds that suggested furniture being rearranged, and what sounded like construction or assembly work. When I asked about the noise, she apologized and explained that she was upgrading her studio setup for better production quality. Around this time, Emma started asking me personal questions that seemed oddly specific. Details about my course schedule, when I'd be home or away, whether I had family visiting, if I was dating anyone seriously. She framed these as normal flatmate conversations, but something about her interest felt intrusive rather than friendly. She also began showing unusual interest in my social work studies, particularly the modules dealing with vulnerable populations and crisis intervention. Emma would ask detailed questions about what we learned in lectures, how we identified at-risk individuals, and what protocols we followed when someone was in immediate danger. I assumed she was just curious about my studies. One evening, while Emma was out on one of her rare excursions, I heard sounds coming from her room despite knowing she wasn't home. Thinking we might have an intruder, I carefully checked her door and found it unlocked. Inside, her computer setup was more extensive than I'd realized. Multiple monitors showing different websites, several cameras positioned around the room, and equipment I didn't recognize, but that looked expensive and professional. What disturbed me most was seeing my own image on one of the monitors. It appeared to be a live feed from a camera positioned somewhere in the common areas of our flat, showing the kitchen and living room from an angle that would capture anyone moving through the space. Emma had been recording the shared areas of our home without telling me. I confronted her about the surveillance when she returned, but Emma had a reasonable explanation ready. She claimed that she'd installed security cameras after some break-ins in the neighborhood and had forgotten to mention them. She apologized for not discussing it first and offered to adjust the camera angles to respect my privacy better. But over the following days, I started noticing more cameras hidden throughout the flat. Tiny devices positioned to capture different angles of the common areas, all feeding back to Emma's monitoring setup. When I looked more carefully, I realized she had created comprehensive surveillance of our entire living space, recording everything that happened when I was home. I also discovered that Emma had been accessing my personal computer when I was out. Files had been moved, browser history showed searches I hadn't made, and my social media accounts had been accessed from IP addresses I didn't recognize. She'd been systematically gathering information about my personal life, my schedule, my relationships, and my online activities. When I confronted Emma about this invasion of privacy, her demeanor changed completely. She dropped the apologetic, reasonable flatmate persona and became coldly professional. She explained that her work required detailed background information about people in her environment, and that my presence in the flat made me part of her operational security considerations. Emma then showed me exactly what kind of content she created. Her monitors displayed dark websites with addresses I couldn't read, streaming platforms that required special browsers to access, and chat systems where users discussed upcoming broadcasts using terms I didn't understand. Her work wasn't gaming content or tutorials. She was involved in producing live streams for audiences willing to pay for authentic, unscripted content. The surveillance of our flat wasn't for security, it was for content creation. Emma had been documenting my daily routines, my reactions to stress, my interactions with visitors, and my responses to various situations. She'd been creating a detailed profile of my behavior patterns and psychological responses for audiences who paid premium rates for authentic material. Most disturbing was learning that I hadn't randomly responded to a flatmate advertisement. Emma had specifically targeted me after researching my background, my studies, my family situation, and my social connections. She'd identified me as someone who would be suitable for her purposes, isolated enough to be vulnerable, but connected enough to generate interest from her audience. Emma explained that her viewers had been following my story for weeks through the surveillance footage. They'd watched me cook dinner, study for exams, talk on the phone with family, and navigate the stress of postgraduate studies. I'd unknowingly become a character in an ongoing narrative that thousands of people were consuming as entertainment. The final phase of Emma's project was transitioning from passive observation to interactive content. Her her audience had paid substantial amounts to move beyond just watching my daily routine to influencing what happened to me. Emma showed me chat logs where viewers discussed scenarios they wanted to see enacted, specific situations they wanted me placed in, and reactions they hoped to capture on camera. I tried to leave immediately, but Emma calmly explained that I was already too deeply involved in her operation to simply walk away. She showed me evidence of my unwitting participation, footage of me in various states of undress, recordings of private phone conversations, and documentation of my daily routines that would be embarrassing if shared publicly. More significantly, Emma revealed that she'd been using my identity for aspects of her dark web activities. Communications sent from my computer, financial transactions processed through accounts opened in my name, and interactions with her network that created digital trails linking me to her operation. If authorities ever investigated her activities, the evidence would suggest I was a willing participant rather than an unwitting victim. Emma's audience had been anticipating this revelation for weeks. The moment when I discovered the truth about my situation was itself content they'd paid to see. My shock, fear, and growing understanding of my predicament had all been broadcast live to viewers who found authentic reactions more entertaining than scripted performances. The final broadcast was scheduled for the following night. Emma's viewers had paid premium rates to see the conclusion of my story, the moment when passive observation became active participation. She explained that my background in social work made me particularly interesting to her audience, people who enjoyed watching those trained to help others become helpless themselves. I managed to escape that night while Emma was distracted with technical preparations. I grabbed what cash I had and left Manchester without telling anyone where I was going. But Emma's surveillance network extended beyond our flat. She'd been monitoring my phone, my email, my social media accounts, and my financial transactions. Every move I made was being tracked and reported back to her operation. Over the past week, I've been moving between different hotels, paying cash when possible, avoiding main roads and CCTV cameras, but they keep finding me. Hotel staff who seem to recognize me despite my using different names, other guests who ask too many questions about my plans, messages sent to devices I thought were secure. Yesterday, I received a package at the hotel I'm staying in. A package addressed to a false name I'd only used for one night. Inside was a tablet computer showing a live stream of my current hotel room, apparently filmed from multiple hidden cameras. Text on the screen explained that Emma's audience had been following my escape attempt and were eager to see the conclusion of my story. The message included details about my movements over the past week, demonstrating that their surveillance had been comprehensive despite my attempts at evasion. They knew which trains I'd taken, which hotels I'd stayed in, even which restaurants I'd eaten at. Every step of my escape had been monitored and broadcast to paying viewers. Tonight's broadcast is being promoted as the finale of what Emma's audience calls the Social Worker series. They've been following my story from the beginning, watching me search for accommodation, move in with Emma, gradually discover the truth about my situation, and attempt to escape. My real life has become a multi-part series for dark web entertainment. The scheduled broadcast location is an address here in Liverpool. Emma's technical setup has apparently been relocated to continue the production, despite my escape from Manchester. Her audience expects to see the conclusion of my story, and they've invested too much money in following the narrative to accept an anticlimactic ending. I could go to the police, but Emma has spent months creating evidence that would suggest I was a willing participant in her dark web activities. My computer history, financial records, and communication logs would all support a narrative of voluntary involvement rather than victimization. The surveillance footage could be edited to remove context and present my actions as cooperative rather than unknowing. Emma's operation is too sophisticated, too well planned, too experienced at managing unwilling participants. The dark web provides anonymity for her viewers, untraceable payment methods, and platforms that can't be easily monitored or shut down by authorities. She can broadcast from anywhere to anyone without meaningful oversight or accountability. Tomorrow night, thousands of people will watch the conclusion of the social worker series. They've paid to see someone trained to recognize and prevent exploitation become the victim of exactly the kind of predatory behavior I studied in university. The irony is part of what makes the content valuable to Emma's audience. I'm writing this from the bathroom of my hotel room because it's the only space where I can't see any obvious camera equipment. But I know they're still watching somehow. The tablet shows real-time footage of the main room, tracking my movements even when I think I'm unobserved. In a few hours, I'll have to decide whether to show up at the address they provided or continue running. But Emma has demonstrated that her surveillance network can find me anywhere, and her audience has been promised a conclusion to my story. The show, as they say, must go on. The most terrifying realization is that Emma's operation probably has multiple series running simultaneously. How many other people might be living unknowingly under surveillance, gradually being prepared for their own final broadcasts? How many students, workers, and ordinary people might be unwitting stars of dark web entertainment? The technology exists to monitor anyone, anywhere without their knowledge. The dark web provides platforms for consuming authentic suffering as entertainment. And there are people willing to pay substantial amounts to watch real victims discover their situation too late to escape it. I never thought my social work training would become relevant to my own survival. But here I am, recognizing all the signs of systematic exploitation and predatory behavior that I learned to identify in vulnerable populations. The difference is that this time, I'm the vulnerable one. Tomorrow's broadcast is titled The Final Session. Emma's audience is expecting authentic reactions, genuine fear, and real consequences for someone who spent years learning to protect others, but couldn't protect herself. The irony would be funny if it weren't so terrifying.